Elfin Swinson let himself into Strangelove. In his wheelchair, he approached the desk of Aoife Sheridan with his tome of a mobile outstretched in his right hand. He stormed in, you could say. Talk about a one-track mind. He blatantly ignored Major Tom, the straight-up living skeleton, skulking in the corner of the room. A good day in the office, assumed the great detective. She rose from her chair, heaving stuck skin from the damp leather, decidedly interested in his refusal to remove his fur-lined trench coat or fluff-topped beanie at her request. They were in the midst of Ireland's hottest summer on record. His arm still bobbed in mid-air and would remain there until the detective took his phone from him. On it, a net group for those dabbling in esotericism which mentioned her shop by name. It was a discussion of vague urban legends along the lines of Bloody Mary, Sydney's cannibal nightclubs, and the story of the clever cat. It's not easy to find Strangelove by any means, but it does exist. You can find it in any nook and cranny when necessary, but it's polite to knock before entering. To prevent unfortunate chance encounters, Aoife kept a trick in her first room. Her receptionist, Hamilton, would often weed out the phonies, so it was rare of her to receive such a grand entrance. It stressed her out a little bit, and so her free hand went wandering to find the nearest drawer in her desk. In it, she found her safety blanket, a fistful of scrumpled scrap paper, which she brought to her face and huffed like gasoline, inhaling the scent of old books and dead silverfish. It helped calm her weary heart, some kind of comforting trigger. God knew that Aoife Sheridan needed some comfort, after all she'd been through to get here. Eventually, Elfin would give in to the strangeness of the situation. He cracked the bones in his fingers, cleared his throat, and asked for her by name. Witch Doctor Detective. You're listening to episode 7 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, an audiozine presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences only. Witch Doctor Detective. She'd not heard that one before, a bit goofball, but Aoife liked it more than Yellowbelly, or Lovecraft, or all of the other names she'd been given. Plus, Macabre Investigator had already been trademarked. She confirmed her existence to him, not that he couldn't tell from the decor. The fabled Occult Detective. You'd need a particular story to warrant the attention of the famous Aoife Sheridan. Elfin told her that he had something. A case for her, he said. Just that had already told her everything she needed to know. That pause there. She took one last huff and returned her therapy paper to the desk drawer for future reference. Aoife's stress had evaporated, and that confused Elfin, who was dancing around the topic at hand. It was fair enough, she'd done the same, but in the grand scheme of things, you have to come to terms with it eventually. You can say it, she told him. You've got a parasite, right? Aoife tapped the side of her head. She had the same thing. Something had burrowed into the back of their heads, metaphorically speaking, of course. It was quite clear that Elfin got the picture, but he still preferred the term evil spirit over parasite. Less vivid, less admission of guilt. Again, fair enough. They prefer remnant, personally. Elfin had been possessed by this evil spirit for a while now, but it wasn't that grim a story. It spoke to him once, appeared in his sleep to discuss its terms with him, and then left him alone. Apparently, he'd been to Killarney National Park for a wander. This was way back in 1995. He probably picked up a rock, or a bit of bark shaped like something ominous. It's always best not to pick shit up in the woods. Aoife wasn't quite sure what year it was now, somewhere between 24 and 25 probably. Her word of the day calendar read 2013, but the word of the day was united. She'd scorned it before, a boring word. The people with the parasites didn't age, so they lost track of time, especially Aoife, who rarely left the sanctum of Strangelove. 30 years though? No trouble? That was unusual. They were chatty little things Aoife knew from experience, having hosted the remnant known as Nuberius for 200-some years. Elfin must have felt comfortable in the witch doctor's care as he began to remove his outer layers. Beneath them hid a dripping wet, beetroot red old man. He had eyes like crime scene marigolds, suggesting liver failure, or something along those lines. Fragile, to the point that, had he not been in his specific supernatural situation, the geezer would have boiled before he reached the door. Normally, you'd assume he was trying to protect his anonymity, but Aoife didn't recognize him in the slightest. From the waft of cologne freed from the real fur trim, to that stockbroker's suit tailored so snugly that his limbs looked like rolls of pennies, Elfin was a man of means, locally famous, perhaps. A golf club and cocktail bar charisma king, certainly not the kind of gentleman to be skulking around looking for witch doctors. It appeared to him in his dream the night after his trip, called itself Rakshasa, offered him a deal, then and there. Obviously at the time, Elfin believed it to be nothing more than a nightmare. He figured he'd eaten something off, or maybe it was just too bloody hot. From the state of him, Elfin wasn't far from the end 30 years ago, and the brain does funny things to you as you age. His story checked out in Aoife's experience. Possession had different effects on the human body, often unique to the remnant in question. Some of them come up on purpose, and they want something from you. Some of them get brought here and trapped by accident. It's their instinct as remnants to become whole once more. They can make you stronger, offer you unique abilities, or heal your wounds in seconds, but they all have one thing in common. A host cannot die a natural death. Remnants are immortal. And this trickles down into the host on a self-preservation kind of level. You never age, you never starve, you don't need to sleep, you don't even need to breathe, really. Aoife was only 20 years old when she underwent her transition, but this poor man would be forever 89. He had dentures that were still giving him sores, as well as stage 4 arthritis, leaving his grip strength shot. His eyesight teetered somewhere between legally blind and totally fucked, and he'd had plates drilled into his bones which were coming loose, but at this point he was 129 years old. He couldn't get a doctor to treat these issues, because they'd have to pull his medical records, and they'd section him. Elfin would remain in this state forever, or at least until somebody cut out his heart or pulled off his head. Unless, explained Elfin, Aoife Sheridan was willing to help him commit to Rakshasa's deal. Elfin needed her to find him a suitable replacement. Woof, she said. Let's slow down a minute there, Faust. Aoife took issue with her predetermined inclusion. She was on a government watch list at the moment, and as such, had to remain at least 40 yards from any invasion of the body snatchers one-man shows. Elfin claimed she'd misunderstood, as he begged her to sit back down. It wasn't like that, not exactly, which, in retrospect, was not a good modifier to turn heads on. Rakshasa's deal was ironclad. The recipient of Elfin Swinson's original body must be a willing party. They must sign a physical contract written in Rakshasa's exact wording. Plus, the signatory has to know in their heart full well what they're signing. The phrase, "in their heart," was a familiar one. In all her years of documentation, she'd seen enough evidence to confirm that remnants were well aware of the concept of consent. There's lots of etiquette involved in getting here, let alone finding a host body. She had definitely never witnessed one use a physical contract. Fascinating. But what did it want? What was the goal here? Elfin explained. Rakshasa would leave him in their form and ask the same of the newcomer. Perpetual immortality. Just ask someone else to stop the world when you want to get off. Sounds fair? It left Aoife staring into space for a short while, as she processed the ramifications. In the end, she would accept the contract, and request that Major Tom bring out the old man a form to fill in. It would take Aoife Sheridan 2 weeks to get back to Elfin, and that was almost entirely because she had better things to be doing. Out of all of Strangelove's open requests at the time, Elfin's could have been done by any bonehead in the industry worth their license. Kooky premise or not, the boogeyman was well and truly within the public conscious these days. Aoife Sheridan had been drowning in this knowledge for years, but now even the government had official procedures to deal with the constant interdimensional cosmic creature shtick. Obviously, the paranormal had always been lurking in the shadows, but ever since that whole, "oh shit, nobody can die, what do we do?" era of human history, we're a little more aware of it all. Remember that? You probably don't. Not many people can recall the events between 2013 and 2014. Joshua Wall could. He was special. A curious little Welshman with rings of eczema around his eyes like a panda bear, and the build to match it. Timid too. He caught Aoife's eye from the get-go. Joshua had arrived with Kim, a willing participant in another one of Strangelove's projects. Moral support, supposedly. Joshua spent much of his time wandering around Strangelove, as though he was visiting a museum on an off day. Occasionally, his fingers would drift towards an ivory rosary he kept in his pocket, but never touched it. He would linger in the labyrinthian annals of Strangelove, which, suffice to say, stretched out a bit further than you'd imagine. Not every door goes back the way it came to save space. Joshua returned to Aoife's sitting room around tea time, a little shaken up. They spoke the usual guff, but sooner or later it became clear that the two of them were on the same wavelength, so to speak. He asked her, out of intrigue, how much her investigation services would cost, hypothetically, of course. She smiled, scooted her leather recliner closer to him, and asked him to explain himself. A decade or two later, we call this event the Defiance. It happened in March of 2013, when one Joshua Aaron Wall was sat in the operator's chair of a Class 175 passenger train, driving his regular route towards Holyhead. He was somewhere between Cumbraun and Shrewsbury when our world felt the actions of Luponfontaine. A surge of overwhelming energies released at the time eviscerated a footbridge on the track, and in the ensuing crash, Joshua was speared through the heart. Now there's a death sentence. There's no medical technology in the world that could kiss that boo-boo better. But in this shaken reality, Cardiff's doctors had all the time in the world to reconstruct Joshua's shredded body. A surgery which lasted 55 days on and off, followed by about a year and a half of constant medically induced comas. Joshua had died in that accident. He had felt it happening, a warmth followed by a sudden euphoria. His mind slipped away and dreamt vividly as it continued to function against the will of nature, sleeping, dreaming, as though the Lord Almighty had brought him into his bosom and comforted him after a long life lived well. And then he woke up, and it was unpleasant here. His muscles had atrophied, but he could turn his head and breathe and see the packed hospital around him. With assistance, he could even sit up and touch his own cold, cold chest. Metal, a rudimentary breastplate guarding an artificial heart. In 2014, death would return once more, and it came in droves for those who had outlasted it. Still, Joshua Wall drew breath. And for what? Once upon a time, his life had been deeply rooted in his faith. Now, Joshua was driven by fear, and that was no life, was it? He didn't feel bitterness or hatred to those who had shown him this path in life. Rather, he simply realized that the God Almighty that he had worshipped was a product of human ingenuity. He had seen the evidence he'd seen because that's what he wanted to see. But if this heart was to fail, he wouldn't see anything. Not his mother. Not his first dog, Judy. Not his Lord and Saviour. He hadn't touched his tea, and so Aoife finished hers and offered the man Rakshasa's proposition. It wasn't a now or never decision, he would sit on it for half a week. To assist him, Aoife picked from her shelves some previously discarded trinket, a small plastic skull from an old Halloween decoration which he left with, believing it would bring him clarity, because she told him it would. On the day of Joshua's return, Aoife made the necessary calls. At a moment's notice, Elfin made his way to her shop as well, so that they could all put this behind them. The witch doctor would lead the two of them through the towering mass of Strangelove to a distant and unfinished room where she would conceive the document and oversee the proceedings. According to Rakshasa, the ritual required both parties to be stood. To avoid complication, Aoife had the two of them strapped to upturned church pews drilled into the ground. She'd gone to a lot of effort for this. Joshua and Elfin were positioned in front of each other, so that when the latter outstretched his shivering fingers, the former could rest the tips of his own against them. There was a great strength in Joshua. His breath slowed as he prepared to strike his greatest fear right between the eyes. A risk from which he could return immortal, or, well, he had nothing to lose really, did he? Elfin felt the same, surely. At this point, he'd already fulfilled his part of the bargain. Regardless of the outcome, Rakshasa would leave him for Joshua, and Elfin could live what was left of his life in peace. And that was all he wanted, wasn't it? With that in mind, it was still difficult to witness the moment Rakshasa initiated the transition. Even from a distance, Aoife could see movement beneath their skin, as though thousands of beetle eggs had hatched at once, clambering to free themselves from the trapping fibers of their muscles. From their screams, it was evident that each bubble brood beneath their surface brought forth an agony unknown. Elfin's jaw clenched so hard that some of his false teeth shattered. The tighter skin soon split like cheesecloth around the heels, between the armpits, and at the groin. Once loosened, it warped and slid across muscle, as though pulled upwards by strings. A sore, leaking tumour of flesh bunched at the summit of their opposing shoulders, leaving only an arm unsheathed. Elfin's on the right, Joshua's on the left. All the hair had been ejected from their bodies, piling around their feet. The same was true for their fingernails, likely to avoid any unnecessary scratching. Aoife could see their respective faces still intact, deflated like B-movie props waiting to be fitted, their bare meat exposed to the elements, the shock of which forced their eyes to bulge out of their skulls. The dripping of viscous fluids onto untextured concrete reverberated around the room, staining the now forgotten empty chamber. The smell would linger in the air as they stood shivering, wet and naked for almost 3 minutes. Aoife inspected the exposed damage of Elfin's weakened frame, his broken metal legs, and the uncomfortable curvature of his crooked spine. Then, she saw the silver box that contained Joshua's plastic heart. It jutted out at several right angles, poking through shredded strips of pectoral muscle. She could almost hear it whirring to keep up with the demand. After a twitch and a throb, the two masses of skin leapt from one body to another. It clung to the opposing flesh like molten steel, and began to adapt to the shape of its new host symbiotically. The screaming had stopped by now. Aoife had clocked it earlier, but it was taking some doing to get Elfin's face onto Joshua's skull. Soon, the faces were slipped on like wrestling masks, as the rest of the flesh seeks out and coats the remaining nakedness, down the back, across the hips, towards the feet, and still, some remained. A leathery mass of aged and unwell yellowed skin had failed to graft correctly. As this new coating was plumbed into his circulatory system, confused blood rushed to those sagging wings. Saddlebags. He'd carry them until the sun burned out. Elfin. It didn't matter how he looked. His permanence was never part of the discussion. Aoife should have figured that one out. He wouldn't have to live with the guilt, so 2 birds with 1 stone, really. She couldn't hear Joshua breathing, but he no longer needed to. Rakshasa had made the jump between host bodies, leaving Joshua with the gift of immortality. It was unlikely that the flesh would heal one day. But even if it did, there was no sign of life behind those bleeding eyes. Rakshasa had doomed itself to a millennia as a rudimentary life support, because Joshua Wall had finally left the building. Aoife followed suit, and locked the door behind her. The Vice President has undergone their formal press junket by the time our magnate appearance casts itself within the ALOHA, Oregon Police Department. Collectively, we flitter above quartz tungsten light and a juxtaposing slew of anxieties. Chronologically speaking, before our detective steps foot in the building, even the folks on Christmas Island know that the 53rd President of the United States has been fired upon on daytime television. You're listening to Episode 8 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, an audio zine presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences only. It is under these conditions that our detective finds themselves most comfortable. Their assignment brief is exactly that, and they are hurried by admin into this bare interrogation room with their index card questions tucked into their breast pocket. In here, with us, the walls are all padded. An unusual feature, likely part of the local refurbishments. The ALOHA, Oregon Police Department did not exist 3 weeks ago. Our eccentric congregation inhabits a former psychiatric hospital, where this place served as board for a rotating cast of the criminally insane. Upon entry via push-bar fire door, our touring detective finds the recent conversion increasingly apparent. Iron tiles simply sit atop foam flooring, afflicting a sensation of weightlessness to each foreboding step. Hard to make a dramatic entrance on the softness of roofed clouds. Another, someone out of our focus, pulls the door closed behind them. Our witness waits for a break in the silence, as several hours have ached their way around the clock face situated above the only exit. Incessant ticking, which echoes around the air as opposed to jutting through it. There will be no eye contact, not for the moment. Not until our detective glances upwards, assessing the situation. An apology is made, if only to clear the air. Poor timekeeping aside, very little else seems to come to mind off the bat. No. Strange. We, our enamored understanding, are unable to grasp it, and instead simply continue to watch, unaffected by the events themselves. Formerly remote, our detective is unfamiliar with the locale, and therefore finds themselves without a seat. Standing now, and for the duration of the interview, they bide their time. First, we watch them prod their fingers into the cushioned walls. Soft, strange, against gnawed nails, impervious to worn nubs. Troubling times indeed. Our witness will sit alone then, at the understandably low table surface, which is made of thick, unforgiving metal, sat atop the singular chair. Similarly, this is made of an unidentified metal, thin, fold-awayable. Our detective might assume it's part of a set, though they see no evidence. Nevertheless, metal. Quite a bit to hand, actually. Pulling their pointer away and then towards our scope, all notions of the overdue refurbishment vacate the premises, and we focus only on our detective. Smart to consider the 16 possibly fatal outcomes of the looming conversation, they are regrettably quick to strike blunt force trauma off the list. Our witness, built like a tenured atlas, shakes uncontrollably, as though they have been spun by Kios himself. Simply put, they are in no state for a lengthy session, let alone a fit of rage, innocent of any charge. Their arms remain unrestrained, though they do not stay seated voluntarily. A cigarette, extinguished, sits in a ceramic ashtray next to a ballpoint pen, as though ALOHA Oregon's risk assessment officer had taken indefinite sick leave. Continuing together, our extended vision looks upon the tape recorder, unbolted and essentially club-shaped, might as well be encased in a pre-shattered glass. Hush unbroken, barely stirred by the metallic wobble of sheet metal, or the vapid echo tick-tocking. Our accumulated animation takes it all in, each bead of sweat, every readjustment of gelled hair, any unusual glances towards the corners of this room, like where the PVC piping pokes out from a 2x4 sheet of missing force dampener. Only yesterday, it seems, a toilet was removed from this room. Fortunately, we detect no scent emanating from its leading depths, and so it is not brought up. We are, however, caught in the updraft of warring emotional states, like a cheap drone carried off by a lazy cyclone. From above, we circle the opposing forces, unconcerned vultures, unaware carrion. Our detective, fighting against tired muscles, reaches to flick on the dictaphone box. A standard start to finish, which will commence with the traditional reading of the current time and today's date, though both full death to our bound receptors. Then, a brief description of our witness, their clothing, their eye color, and their date of birth, all done in the tone of a newsreader. An unavoidable quirk, nearly a joke even, designed to wrench a smile from our witness. It almost does, though stoically overcast quickly becomes an apt description of their sour Sunday weather report of an expression. Our expansive reclusion finds clear air and flutters downwards, coming to a gentle hover just above the two-leg tabletop. From this angle, there are hinges, short focal length now. With no reasonable effort, our shared vision captures both our detective and our witness, as words are exchanged and roles are explained. ALOHA Oregon Police Department requests a simple statement from our witness, one to encapsulate the nation-quelling event to which they were first responder. Nice and short now. Our witness is okay with this, nodding with all the enthusiasm of Themis, sentencing themselves to the admission of murder, regardless of motive. Study our witness's preface to their oral biography, their shift in posture, zoom into their gullet as they swallow the lump in their throat, then catch the double take back up at the clock face. Our witness knew the vice president and the man who preceded him on a first-name professional basis. In disgrace, our witness has removed their own name tag, but understand that they wore it with pride. Not a day would pass without them passing once or twice. As such, one might assume the same of the culprit. We needn't assume, as fuzzy visions of badgers boasting in bad dreams are gifted unto our present compilation, wherein the silhouette of either one stands proud of their position. We can consider it either one because our witness and the culprit may as well have occupied the same mortal vessel. Both, for one, were considered veterans of war, though the war in question was a vague one. In the memories we are holding, our tireless visage flutters through a harsh training regime, a rigorous selection process, and the passage of 17 focused years of trial and error in barely the blink of an eye. Finally, lowered standards, the United States Secret Service. Only 1% of applicants ever make it to the tantalizingly entitled role of special agent, and then there's the other impossible leap. For the best of the best sits the Shield of Kings, personal guard to the US President. A milestone shared with those we christen the culprit, a commendation achieved by only 2 at a time, with the election ratio selected seemingly at random. A goal set between barrack mates, who made the initial switch together following a glowing reference from their commanding officer. It is here, in a lower Oregon of all places, where the culprit revealed their true intentions. Flash forward a little, and the fuzz clears. A television broadcast. Our witness has now seen the live footage themselves. Multiple angles, but in each one, there is a clock face visible. At the strike of 3 o'clock, in the midst of a press conference regarding recent civil disruptions, the culprit drew their weapon and fired a single bullet into space. All time would screech to a near stop here, as though Kronos himself had to take a look-see, slowed down, for ourselves now, and for our witness then. Of course, nothing can be done as the projectile proceeds to pierce the president's skull, reversing their mortal presence on contact. As we re-witness this historic moment, even our momentous gorp must rewind a tick to take in the second shot fired. A trigger finger trained for this very moment, instinct, muscle memory. Our witness fires their own insight into the slowed time. Aloha, Oregon had been home to the culprit, as it had been home to our witness. Our rejected point of view exits the eidetic picture house to the sound of neighboring scuffles, echoed too. A meeting, perhaps, has been called to discuss the department's next course of action. Our detective ought to get a move on, they assume. Having told their tale, though, our witness assumes that the conversation must wrap up sooner rather than later. More questions requiring more answers. These are asked aloud and relate to the relationship between the two involved parties. Not strictly professional, though little more than work brought life to their occasional night-off bar banter. Neither met prior to their military service, with our witness being schooled in England. Though a friendly rivalry brought them together in competition, in our own unseen stead, we see our witness no longer shakes nor sweats, sworn belief in their own statements as they confess prior knowledge of their colleagues' political persuasions, an awareness of the manifesto found, though not revealed, by our detective. They admit to never having questioned their congressional leanings more than the occasional "didn't like that much." In their own words, our witness states thusly, "Not mine, not my business," when finally asked about the hand-bound physical proclamation. Our detective agrees, a mutual silence as their neighbor stops arranging rows of fold-awayable metal chairs. Time has all but ticked, and now they reach into their breast pocket. Our witness calls themselves a champion of democracy, though they do not use those words. Again, there's a nod of agreement. Our detective retrieves their boon, a touchscreen cell phone tucked behind their index cards, unlocked, searched through, and placed upon the table between them with a video open for viewing. Against our woven will and our best intentions, we're shown the shooting again. Another angle, though there are no time-based gimmicks in this gruesome walkthrough. Upper right now, black and white, seeing mostly our witness's half of the president's assaultment. shot. Drop, drop. Panic, screams. Our witness then drops to their knees. Finn, back in the room with the rest of them. "Watch it again," says our detective, though not to us. Still, we follow direction and pay close attention. Say aloud what's wrong with this footage. Our unique assortment takes flight from this transitional space to one recreated by our own grand hive mind. Our fixed rail track takes us not from the first shot, but from the moments leading up to it. Slowed words from the president, presiding over the room with leaded heaviness. A day will come, but that day is not today. It was along those lines, though not in those words. Immediately ahead of the podium, their designated position of power, is an analog clock, ticking away, swallowed by delayed sentiments and empathetic preludes for all but two in the room. 3 o'clock strikes. As before, the first shot is fired, though in the split second before our witness can return fire, our position in video is paused and scrubbed backwards. Purposely, our ordained omniscience is placed 14 frames prior to the first shot. Intentionally, our gaze now matches that of the video, as we're pulled from our privilege by the specificity of the action. It was, obviously, the strike of 3 o'clock that triggered this event, but as evidence had suggested, it was not as easy as expected to reach this point. A premeditated murder of this degree required the patience of a saint, so when that fated 3 o'clock clocked in, it took a few seconds for the deed to be done. Patience. Take your time. It's an important moment, and you don't want to rush it. This patience had been earned, so to speak, and this was evidently not shared by their accomplice. Watch again. While the culprit keeps their eye on the clock, they do so without pattern. Our witness, though, they check every 2 minutes. Now even, just now, there's nothing up there. It had become little more than a nervous tick, evidence of an unregistered fealty. Watch once more. As the clock strikes 3, immediately, our witness goes for their holstered weapon because they knew what to expect. The culprit had intended to die a martyr, with our witness championing democracy, but within moments, our detective has their confession on tape. ALOHA, Oregon has their scapegoat. Team effort. The president will see historical preference over a murderous troop who fell at the last hurdle. The dictaphone box is flicked off, the exit is opened by another, and our detective leaves with no further questions or comments. Clock. 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 If there had been no clock, then why had our accomplice seen one? Dictated by the tick-tock in their ears, they stand and listen. Our effervescent loom captures every panicked instinct, every synapse firing off harder than ever before, perhaps seeking an unlikely escape. No, they seek something hollow. Each wall is padded and therefore they drop to their knees. Pipes. Those PVC pipes once thought to connect to a drainage system, instead simply poke through to the neighboring room, where 3 rows of the same bulk-ordered black metal chairs face their interrogation chamber. It is the squeak of shoe leather that prompts the chemical explosion within our accomplice. Clear as day across their bloodshot visage, instant action fury, channeled into a hectic banging and an erratic begging against that seemingly paper-thin wall. This does not save them from their fate, no. Instead, it reveals it clearer. Our gawping collaboration looks up, as our accomplice does, at a fallen foam panel. Behind it, an insulated glass barrier hardly frosted enough to hide the grand appearance of a flooding audience. Tough to make out wholly, our accomplice plugs their ear to the pipe to hear their own execution announced on network television. Mum's book says that a child's first experience with death should be an artificial one, brought on at a relatively young age by the passing of an insubstantial pet, purchased purely with its mortality in mind. That way, when a close relative kicks the bucket in front of them, all quiet-like, it doesn't hit them as hard as it should. I couldn't prove that to you, but I can say that I certainly didn't feel very much when my paternal grandmother passed away last week. That is, besides irritation, because somebody decided that I should saw through the 92 years of warm garbage that she had stuffed into her converted bungalow.
Like, the contents of this box includes both layers of a box of Danish sugar cookies, an old PS/2 adapter, and an old brass goose. I mean, isn't this the last opportunity to take a look at all her ooblets and oddities before they're divided amongst scarpering family members and penultimately dropped into an op shop to be handed between infinitely expiring owners a la pass the parcel? I wouldn't be sifting through this shit now if I'd just cried, but she was 92, man. That's plenty old in my opinion.
You're listening to episode 9 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, an audiozine presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences only.
There's still art on the walls, waiting for some scone-faced witch to sneak in and search the spaces behind them for Nana's secret stash of cold, hard cash. Not that she had any. I mean, programmers didn't exactly make bank back in the day. There's an old collection of board games beneath the sofa, many of which are no longer sold due to collective choking hazards, lead paint jobs, and fascist undertones. Amongst them, I find a jackpot, an old-fashioned virtual reality headset, Foxtech technology at its finest. An immersive experience funded by scores of wealthy nerds on the net. This was no rookie shit, Nana. On the side of the beige packaging are indented numerals, which report that I am holding dev kit number 632 out of 3,000 in total. I've been told that I have objective eyes by Mum. That's why I'm wearing the anti-hoarding patrol badge for today. This one's mine, I'd say. $3.25 an hour? Not having it. That's barely workman's wage. The Imhotep entertainment system, or the Imibox, if it still worked, would fetch a pretty penny online. Don't think much of games, me. I'm sure Nana kept it around for the younger ones, but maybe she kept her fondness for tinkering well into her senile years. You know, when she wasn't forgetting the name of her only grandson or microwaving her poor succulents until they were no longer that. In the corner of my eye, I watch a lone moth flap out from beneath the box's unfurled lip. It lands hard at my pigeon print socks, where it reveals itself as nothing more than a slip of cardboard, not like the packaging at all. Bright pink, and anything but gentle on the old peepers. Immersive VR for the masses. Foxtech thanks you. I dip into the box itself. Here, the helmet sits beneath wads of totally untouched white tissue, as though bare eyes had never even seen it. It couldn't have just been given to Nana, though. Take it out of the packaging, and there's the yellow scars of repetitive daylight hour usage, and the foam padding on the inside had been worn down to nothing but fluff and Velcro. It buckled around the chin with a Delrin clip, the stitching on which had seen better days. As I lift it towards my face, a precious grey hair becomes unstuck from the bleached protective plastic, encasing the vital glass diodes and all the miscellaneous gubbins. There's a smell to it, not the hair, the headset, and it's not a pleasant one. Disgust does damage to my internal hull of innocence, as scent torpedoes of unclean thoughts are fired from the SS disinfectant. It had been spritzed quite recently, and so I drop it. You can't just leave something like that, you know? You've got to find out why. Sure, there was the chance that Emma, her youngest great-grandchild, had gotten her slimy Vegemite fingers all over it. I mean, that would need a quick misting from the bottle of wintergreen underneath the kitchen sink. I am equally partial, however, to the idea that my grandmother might have just been hiding something from us all. First, double-check the packaging for any reputation-destroying physical media that Nana might have wanted to rid herself of before her grand farewell. They're like that. Stacks and stacks of books. Lots of kinky corner shop romance novels Nana had. Obviously, all things considered, her content would be stored in the headset alone. You didn't even plug it into the wall anymore, let alone a computer or a disk drive. I've only ever used one once, in class, and it turns out that they make me motion sick. Don't worry, Nana. I'll delete your search history, even if I vomit doing it. It's a real simple system. Stick it on your head, strap the 4 limb nodes onto the appropriate appendages, and once it detects a pulse, the internal HUD switches on for you. Very bright, all of a sudden. Then, there's a voice. Not a voice. You hear it in your bones more than anywhere else, like hard copy subtitles being fed into your body, rather than just pumping a pre-recorded speech into your ears. Warning, it blares. This development kit will now initiate.
please ensure that you are seated comfortably. In case of emergency, the exits are all around you. It's a helmet, just take it off. Make sure all windows and curtains are closed and drawn, as more than 78% of our initial user base reported theft as their biggest system issue. Thank you for using the Imhotep entertainment system, and please enjoy the ride. Are you prepared?
I suppose I am, and so I confirm. You can tell it's an early development kit, because I felt my still largely unprepared body go limp before my sight expired and my lungs filled. A surging sequence of intermittent plaid-coloured strobe lights, the quiet hum of a solid-state drive booting up, and a few nonsense hieroglyphics guide my way into the system's fully fledged, immersive library experience. Bloody hell, must have a lot of memory. There's like 30 shelves here, though they're all basically empty. I've got no hands, that's mad. A world where your entire sense of self is lost by choice. Neat, when you think about it like that. Poor Nana could hardly walk at the end of things. Probably didn't really know what was going on. At least not all of the time. I guess that when the company drew thin, she could pop this bad boy on and go for a walk or something. I don't know, she probably liked it here. She certainly picked out the wallpaper because it was a horrible JPEG of her own in her bungalow. Vast ruby roses, where each pixel had been stretched to the size of a widescreen telly. Murder on the eyes, if it were real. Is it real? Does it matter? Are my eyes open? There's quite a lot to take in. I can certainly feel myself breathing in and out, but I can't tell if I'm doing that on purpose or not. Scouring Nana's content library left much to be desired. Mark hard copies of Seinfeld, a few vinyl records here and there. Not very organised, but then there's not a lot to move around. There's one game, called Cloud and Comet. Probably something to show off to the youngins, I guess. On the bright side though, no porno, no nudies, nothing of note, not even an internet browser, nothing to delete. So my attention is turned back to the video game. When I'd gotten motion sick, I was exploring a presupposed settlement on Mars that some nonsense billionaire said he was going to build in 80 years. You'd think they'd think about it more when it came to video games, right? Might as well give it a shot. It's got all the wear and tear of a real physical box, so much so that I expect to find a cracked disc left inside by some niece or nephew. But as I'm prying the plastic open, a whole world begins to render around me in a flurry of orange hues and dry, dusty winds. I'm logged into a character with immediate effect. No title screen, nothing. Right into the action once the particle physics settle and the music swells up behind me. I find myself knee-deep in the hot dunes of a great expansive desert. I am almost certain that there are 3 suns in the sky, but I like my retinas solid and unsautéed. A stream of this virtual sunlight scalds my avatar's cheek so hard that I felt myself twitch in real life. Her cape shields me from blindness, but it's absolutely roasting in here. For miles around me, I can see nothing but beautiful dandelion skies, angular vegetation, and sandscapes breathing amidst those thick, wobbly lines you get in the distance of summer. Dotted amongst these towering castles appears to be behemoth arrivals of us. Like massively misplaced pine cones, these cavernous cairns appeared to serve as temporary homesteads for a cautious herd of scaled creatures. They emerge, of course, because they are programmed to do so at the sight of a player character. I am not prepared for this, obviously. I'm watching with a feeling not so distinct from actual real-life fear as 6 of these lizards start slithering through the banks towards my avatar. To propel themselves, their front limbs are contorted inwards like a mantis. They're used as oars, right then left, then right then left. With their heads, they bob beneath the surface, like freestyle swimmers taking short, powerful breaths. I think they were sussing me out at first, and maybe I had a second or two to act, but I was much too busy narrating to do so. Now seemingly afraid but compelled by their game logic, the creatures begin to lunge at me. Only they're bouncing off one by one. Clean right off me. Barely felt it, more like a gentle vibration. I'm still flailing around, obviously, exactly how I'd react to a real fight of any description, casting off insignificant signs and gestures in a vague hope I'll do something spectacular. Something, indeed. Apparently a passive skill has kicked in, and I'm now mid-analysis of the bastards. It informs me that I am, in fact, up against 6 level 210 Drake headhunters through another voice in my bones. In this situation, I can only think of my dear confused Nana. It was probably my little cousins who downloaded the game, and then the old dear loaded it up and wandered into the wrong area, where she was brutally beaten upon until she gave in and took the headset off. That'd explain this strange place, I guess. Not exactly the tutorial, is it? Level 210? How much of your life do you need to spend in order to reach 210? I'm distracted. Barely notice the monsters burying themselves back in their mysterious poop structure, probably waiting for another player to pester. A momentary struggle with my ephemeral surroundings and a brief tumble down a very poorly placed hill, and I happen upon the game's main menu. It's 2 fingers on your left hand, swept upwards with an outstretched arm, if you need to know. Such a strange feeling that. I'm pulled out of my own head without warning, only to be offered a third-person view of my own virtual cadaver. And, well, it certainly looks like my Nana. Got the grey hair, got the wrinkles, she had this mole on her nose and it looks like she got that in there too. Neat, I guess she did have hobbies. Makes sense, like I said, she couldn't really get out of the house very much. My elbows are sweating, so I can tell you that this is pretty much the same as being outside. Only I'm tired, and I don't really mind it. She must have spent a lot of time here then. Let's have a look. 892 hours, 380 million comet pieces. I snap out of my stupor, filled with an uncontrollable urge to flick through each and every available menu. Look, I'm not that good with numbers. Listen, I'm pretty sure that's nearly a year straight of playtime. She's got a fully stocked inventory and a craft bag full of mythical grade equipment and max level MP potions. Her quest log is incomprehensible, and its page count is almost as high as her character's level. Now I don't know what these symbols mean, but Nana's got game. She's been role-playing as level 981++, Hellfire Hexblade, Zajira Mogwink, a master of demonology, pickpocketing, and two-handed weaponry. She did like pets, so I suppose the little demon follower might suit her quite well. A hellhound, probably. She had a nasty temper sometimes. I wonder if she had any friends on here. Doesn't seem to be a button, not that I can see. Purely for giggles, I step forward onto the devil's territory, and the level 210 Drake headhunters make their advance once more. Slithering along timid as before, they take their shot at me. I just want to see the scale of the character we're talking about here, you know? Nana's got game, that's for sure. But how much exactly, quantity-wise? With the skill set menu, I was able to take a glance at the combat gestures, and it seemed simple enough. Just by using my right ring and pinky fingers, swept diagonally away from me, I summon upon the yellow skies a plague of auburn storm clouds. Thunder rumbles, but it's not our thunder, is it? You don't feel sound in your feet, do you? The monsters are frozen stiff. A stressed-looking skull icon implies they're afflicted with fear like the menu told me. I watch the skies part before me, and from between the two stirring masses, a great fist emerges and comes crashing into the dunes, erasing all but me from existence. The sun eventually pulls itself from the smog that I have brought about, and I'm letting the power go straight to my head. I can even feel a smirk coming across my face as I watch my own flames smolder and die. Beneath them, a literal scorched earth situation unveils itself in the form of a glass lake, spreading across the desert for miles in all directions. It appears that I have ruined this area for everybody. Dang. Nana does have game. Prepared for the transition now, I return to the third-person menu to marvel at my mess. It, like everything else, is hard to look at right now, but I managed just as well, before seeking out the world map menu. Cloud and Comet apparently spreads itself across 16 diverse nations, and 2 different dimensions reserved for special event campaigns, making it almost impossible to set a course anywhere without feeling immediately intimidated by the scope of it all. Makes me feel like a nerd, really. One quick journey, just to get the feel of it. Can't let the youngins have it, they wouldn't appreciate the value. The nearest town is, say, 15 minutes to the north, which is plenty of time to figure out whether or not I'm enjoying myself or not. Then I should probably get back to packing my recently deceased Nana's mortal belongings before my mother comes back to pick me up. Shouldn't be too difficult, really. I've got the COMET down to a T, and I can just skate across this new glass highway. I'm so good at this, man. Just as I'm sticking a virtual pin in the vicinity of Quiet Knoll, I am interrupted by a rapid beeping in my lower gut. A notification suddenly takes over the entire map, a huge, immersion-shattering white box. A message. From who, though? A smiley little symbol beside the sender tells me it's another player from Nana's mystery friends list. Without prompting, the message begins reading itself aloud, and it's in my bones again. I hate it.
Kumok, is that you? It's been a little while, but I'm glad to know that you're still with us. Some at the guild believed that you had assumed room temperature. After all, you wouldn't be the first to give up the ghost, eh? It's good to know that nothing can keep our party started down for too long. The guild is in the villa if you want to pop in. From Pigman.
Not a fan of that username, but otherwise it's nice to know that Nana had some pals. At least she wasn't totally alone basically all the time, you know? I see I've made a mistake, no need to point that out. If I'd seen her playtime, I wouldn't have logged in, okay? I mean, nobody plays a game like this for that long without making a friend or two along the way. Party starter. The phrase party members had appeared in the menu. I guess Nana was the first member of the guild. Way to go, eh? What a woman, really. And a villa? Obviously, my Nana would find a community her own age. She hated the youth as a concept. To her, all but her own were swindling clubs. She said that all the time to other people in the street. I decided that I should let them know the bad news, but I'm not sure how to reply to the message. I ask, aloud, to her resuming,
Would you like to repeat the message?
Oof, get out of my bones. I don't know how to do this, so instead I click the underlined word villa with my finger. All of a sudden, I'm somewhere else. No longer does the horizon melt into the strange sandy skies, but I can see a huge white stone mansion, very modern looking, with a lot of lush greenery. The sky is, for whatever reason, still yellow. The breeze is nice. You can hear it for miles as it gently passes the brush of an untouched evergreen forest. Ahead of me is a gate, big stone gate. Can't climb that, don't want to blow it up. Probably got a password, but maybe there's a cool fantasy intercom that I can use. Obviously not, what am I for? Instead, though, I see a plaque, gold-plated. Engraved into it are the names of their highest-ranking guild members. Sajira Mogwink, Pigman Manpig, Pat the Liar, Crew Cut King Tut, Y'all Reet Meat, Jetta Yesterday. Just approaching this seems to call the gates into action. They react to the ring worn on my avatar's left hand.
All hail.
Call the bushes in that dreadful voice.
All hail.
Do stop, please. Christ. I have to do this, don't I? I have to sidle up to that big white door, knock 3 times and say, Hello, your friend is dead, actually. I'm not her, I'm just having a nose. Bye. Like, they're not gonna hear about this through the grapevine, are they? They could be all over the world, right? Regardless of this internal struggle, I'm still walking forwards, up the cobblestone path and onto the front stoop. Here, I am facing the door, and I'm biding my time. There's a huge knocker here. There's 2, actually. Weird. I think I'll go with the right one. It happens before I even touch either of the knockers. Just the gesture causes my entire armor set to unshackle and fall to the ground beneath me. It disappears, and I'm left in a rather expensive looking set of house clothes. These also slip off all of a sudden. Well, that's embarrassing. How do I put these back on? Why is that an option? Was it my hands? I ought to... With a sudden quake and shudder, I find myself unable to stop the villa's grand door from opening to the presence of Nana's guildmates. Right away, a set of 12 gazes seem to lock onto mine, and I'm not entirely sure where to look. Probably at the masks. For a start, hand-painted animals, 24 pairs of eyes pull away and return to their business. It doesn't, but it feels like the world pulls out around me for a second, and I can see it all, literally everything, in its grandest scope. They're all naked. Besides the masks, obviously. And like the rabbits some mimic, they are all going at it against the virtual furniture. A fishman calls out my Nana's name. He is wearing a tasteful zebra mask, and he appeared to be perched atop another creature, describable only as an upright sewage vein with the face of a lurcher. It's good to see you, I think he said. I'm not sure. He hasn't stopped what he's doing to that yet. I've missed you, baby. Our little gatherings haven't been the same since the party starter stopped showing up. There was a cheer. Dang. Nana does have game. tearing along, hands at 2 and 10, doing it all by feel at this point. Doesn't matter, does it? I'm zoning, dry-eyed out the window instead. The harbour bridge is a smear to our bendy bus, and so are its pedestrians. It's rush hour on foot. There are so many bodies beneath me, and in front of me, and on top of my roof. It's all really come on at once, hasn't it? We're all gonna die pretty soon. A couple of minutes, really. Christ.
You're listening to episode 10 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, an audio zine presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences only.
Stay straight, but don't look at them. You don't swerve for anything smaller than a hound, and some of them are on all fours. Are they paying attention to me? To us? Space for 77 passengers, but only carrying 6 in total, and we're not hiding it. One of them is one of them, and another is already dead. It's not like they're banging on the windows, is it? Growing up, my dad would always say to me, "Mate, in this world you can do anything you want to do, but at some point, somebody is going to come up to you and ask you, why?" If he started a sentence with mate, you knew he was going to be a real asshole about it. "Why are you doing that?" he'd ask. The line cook is asking me that very question right now. The stowaway has been yelling at me non-stop since we left the opera house. Something hurt, but I haven't really taken a look at it yet. Probably for the best, really. The psychic has been in my ear non-stop, begging me to stop and let some of them get on with us. Under the circumstances, I am furious, but I get it. I get it. We know now, see, that they're still in there, fighting, watching, feeling, only dead on the outside, so it seems. It feels only fitting that after 14 years of cutting them down, we should spend our last moments trying to help them. Yeah, I can understand that, but I do not come off as though I can understand that. Instead, I'm yelling back at her with my chalky voice, and I am telling her, I think, to piss off. I would rather crash headfirst into the toll booths than just let it get us. I'm still yelling, I think, as we scorch past the security checkpoint, which we left in ruin prior to getting into the city. The big wall is a few miles behind us now, if it's still there. I double check, and it isn't. A quick head count reveals that, additionally, we've lost Old Tom and the mugger. I should reassure the survivors, maybe. Bump. I should tell them that the worst will be behind us soon enough. Rumble, grind, bump. I think a tire popped just then. If I said something nice, I could put them at ease. I've had enough practice by now, plenty of exercise in futility. It has always felt like a pointless endeavor, cheering them up. So why stop now that it is one? I've spaffed out all the classics. Don't worry, I've said. They won't get us here, okay? We're safe now, doll. I've got your back. Have you got mine? Blah, blah, blah. I say nothing, obviously, because the worst is already behind us. And it's not very far behind us. It is catching up. Oh God, it's gaining on us. And it will, no word of a lie, swallow us whole in a minute or two, because this heaving beauty of mine is capped at 66 miles an hour. God, it was such a good idea at the time. Took a week to get enough gasoline. Took another to reinforce the bonnet. Plowing through the wall, though? That feeling was worth it. If he'd been around, my dad would have been stoked. But no, he had the idea in mind. He had a few ideas, actually. Like that fucking question, which he never bothered to answer for himself. He asked it plenty. You can tell I'm very bitter about it. But when he realized that we no longer needed him, that he was dead weight slugging along behind us, that he was walking slurry beneath the 16-ton bendy bus of total redundancy, my dear old dad walked himself into the South Pacific from DY Beach. Didn't forget to leave those famous last words, though, one last time, in a letter of all places. Alright, I can almost see the toll booths now. If there wasn't so much slurry, I could touch them with my high beams. The psychic won't shut up long enough for me to say anything, let alone something nice. There's no point in arguing. Maybe I should try something different. Isn't your life supposed to flash before your eyes when you're about to die? There's been plenty of bloody time. How about bump, squeak? Hey, remember when we were living in Ku-ring-gai? 6 years that lasted.
The basin was a nice campground before the fall, and it was just as safe afterwards. Well armed, of course, because we didn't know any better at the time. Our tent-pole barracks stacked full with chefs, doctors, and, well, lawyers. Too close to Palm Beach, really. Whatever. We had it good. A support group. A community of people who we chose to leave helpless in our wake when we took their guns and we took their boat. Okay. Maybe something else. Boom. Clunk. Hey, remember that one night in Warwood? You could still smell the macas in the air. Never thought I'd miss that smell, you know. We broke into the picture house, nicked their vintage photographs. I've still got one in my pocket, I think. Early 2010s, he's standing with him from the Sherlock movies. It was great. Until one of the hungry ones blew itself up and we lost the shrew. Hadn't seen that before. I haven't slept much since. Bump. Hey. How about that zombie fight club, eh? Sure, I know they told us not to use that word. It's offensive, probably. That was the exact phrasing, though. I have the ticket stub, and it's got the Prime Minister's bloody signature on it. I'll be honest, I enjoyed that fight. And I'd probably enjoy the memory, too, if it hadn't directly led to this exact moment. Hey, don't you forget where we are right now, driving at 65.5 miles per hour, hydroplaning over giblets. Not even glancing at the wing mirrors anymore, are you? You're not looking, because, well, what would be the point? Rumble, rumble, rumble. What else would you see? Besides, of course, the dome of impervious light following the bendy bus at 55 miles per hour, at 56 miles per hour, at 57 miles per hour, etc., and so forth. You're not looking, because just looking was enough to seemingly irreversibly blind your right eye. Keep that to yourself, mate. Boy, it's starting to get hot, eh? I can't imagine how that's gonna feel. Christ. I have spent so long thinking that I will be eaten alive, screaming and feeling every last rotten tooth or barbed nail. Now I'm gonna be disintegrated. Vaporized. I mean, at the very least, it'll be quick. What's that, 62 miles per hour? It's alright, I'm still hedging my bets. I'm pretty sure that if we can get off the coat hanger quick sticks, we can probably hard left ourselves out of its radius before it's too late. I can almost hear the sound of blacktop beneath the wheels of my heaving beauty. It'll be bump, puff, puff, and then we'll be off the bridge. I can almost hear that. I can almost feel all 16 tons of momentum coming to a sheer, graphic halt as I harshly misjudge the breathing room between booths, sending the stowaway and most of the line cook through the reinforced windshield as though we'd made it out of paper mache. I don't feel a thing because the driver's cab is well insulated and I am wearing the only seatbelt aboard. Jesus, the psychic is still talking. Can anybody else, say something nice for a change? Fuck. Who's left? Just us? Must be. Everybody else is being quiet for once. That's all it took, huh? At least the stowaway got an easy out. Listen, they're still not banging on the windows. They've got no interest in us. Do you see now? Christ, who? Me or her? Listen, they're scuttling around us while they can, like how mice cross skirting boards. Wish they'd just eat me, actually. I'd rather go out like that. At least I would feel like I've gone down shooting. I'm prepared for that, you know. I've thought about it all night, every night for a very, very long time. And I'm not prepared at all for my last breathing thought to be, they're more scared of you than you are of them. That's the caboose burning, that smell. Certainly not prepared for my last craving to be a burger, fried egg on top, like in the basin, where the unscrubbed barbecue pits made everything taste like seared beef, even though we had none. Not prepared for the look I'm getting from the line cook as I unbuckle my seatbelt. Not prepared for the psychic's sudden, subtle silence. And obviously, it all brings back my father's immortal question of why are you doing that, mate? As I stand myself up on crooked feet, as I watch the accordion plastic between the two compartments shrivel and melt in anticipation. It is hot, actually, and it's coming very quickly. The expulsion of a UN-backed experimental warhead. In the grand scheme of things, 14 years had been long enough for us to sort out our own shit, right? As it eviscerates the back end of my heaving beauty, I think of how my dear, dead dad and his paltry little letter. And I think of his question and how before he took steps into his doom, he probably told himself the same thing. Mate, when somebody asks that question for real, you're gonna need a fucking good answer.
In the western turret of the oldest part of the Nomi Grimarcy archive, a silver bell tolls. It rang for 3, because the self-isolation of the witches ran on Central European time, and magic kept the sun in the sky, despite it actually being 11:30 here about the world.
You're listening to episode 11 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, an audio zine presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences only.
The castle sat by the shore on an isle invisible to the mortally inclined, somewhere just outside the modern limits of the Great Australian Bight. Not that this mattered, as fledgling witches weren't permitted to leave campus grounds until the weekend, and it was very much a Wednesday. Punctual as she was, Archwitch Victoria failed to settle her final class of the day before the chimes rang out. This particular time, on this particular day, meant that the Archwitch could leave her designated classroom in the 4th hall, go home, and have a beer in an hour. Unfortunately, this looming hour would be spent wrestling with the rowdiest of the 3rd grade groups the Our Lady of Palace School of Witchcraft had to offer. Somehow, she needed to carve magical history's vaguest dates into their collective amygdalae before tomorrow brought about the first day of the spring examination season. See, at the end of their first semester of 3rd grade, fledgling witches were tried and tested on their knowledge up to this point. Their physical capabilities, their innate spellcasting endurance. After sitting their baccalaureate magick and following a personal review, each student would then be allowed to choose their major discipline of magic. In comparison to Class 3A, whose chosen class familiar took the form of the traditional black cat, and Class 3C, who decided out of spite they'd pledge allegiance to the plague rat, Archwitch Victoria found Class 3B and their obscure yet blessed poodle-shaped guide to be entirely insufferable. Overachievers were the worst kind of kids. She'd seen many a prodigy grow up to misuse their talents and commit regicide or magical fraud. A quick scan of her caffeine-stoked eyes. At least most of them had the decency to sit themselves down at the start of the bell toll, but that had much to do with her 6,000-yard stare. Gloomy. Only last week, in a fit of misery, Victoria had bound the 3rd-year representative Stanley Steele to his stool with a level 4 Ocnus rope. The head witch had a few words for her after that, though she kept her tenure and her title. Her stare, however, only worked on 8 out of 10 students, and she knew from experience that her words would not be enough to quell these tyrannical mid-teenagers. Her mean streak had lengthened over time, and with a 3-week holiday heading her way, Archwitch Victoria felt it only natural to pull a nasty little prank on the unruly thing standing before her. A verbal warning came first, though it was done very much under her breath. At the snap of her fingers, Gregor dripped down from the rafters. Rather, most of him did. He was in delightful form today. Gregor was Victoria's familiar, with whom she'd heart-bonded with way back when. He was an unus, a cannibal spirit who'd once been a 6-lined race runner, though he'd developed an additional stripe for extra swiftness in the changing process. Oh, Gregor had been running amok as an urban legend throughout Victoria's hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina, all throughout her childhood. So when she captured him in 1866, it made the same of her. She didn't love him, but she certainly thought he was pretty neat. How it worked was that, in his original form, Gregor had been overcome with some metaphysical desire, much akin to tenacity, which dictated he would eat 100 other race runners in the rather specific time frame of 66 days. The resulting magical transformation rendered Gregor nearly 7 feet long and mostly made of smog and teeth, with a ferocious hunger. She explained all this aloud, of course, as part of her lesson, going further even to relate the existence of Gregor and his Unus family to Nerslung, the saint of unending famine. Gregor's lizard skin hung off and around him in a most disconcerting manner, as though it bubbled by his own spiritual pressure. He could slip in and out of it at will, and when in a particularly good mood, it would puppet his actions. They were all in their seats now, if only to avoid Gregor's formless snout. Some were standing on their seats, and a few of them were screaming, but they all had their mouths open, so it was difficult to figure out which ones over Gregor's constant rattling. He held no ill will, Gregor. Didn't even like the taste of witch flesh. Worked a charm, though. His chattering underlined Victoria's words like a morbid drum roll, as she explained simply today's assignment. Cram like you've never crammed before. With a snap of her fingers, Archwitch Victoria summoned 3 4th grade students from outside the room, her resident nerds, and Our Lady of Palace's homegrown AV club. On brand, they brought along an old fatback CRT television. Still had the VHS player attached to it, though that would relate to the first lesson. Clark Cooper, being the public face of this merry band of total losers, and being pledged to Victoria after unwittingly causing a semi-nuclear catastrophe in their 2nd grade dormitory, took the liberty of ushering Gregor out of the room. He did so downwards, slipping through the floorboards. The slick, smelly vapor that Gregor left behind was promptly mopped up by second-in-command, Director of Photography, Adelaide Incas, who conjured up and quickly dispersed an entire bottle of Magician's Mr. Muscle across the porous wood, which didn't so much mask the scent, but embolden it. The third one, Apollo did nothing of interest, as per usual. Archwitch Victoria's 3 favourite wimps had been called upon to produce 3 short movies. As 4th graders at the school, the AV club had seen the most recent exam set, and they'd already chosen their major disciplines. Victoria assumed that they would be slightly more equipped to heave these deadweights over the pass line. Also, she didn't want to do it. Clark introduced their picture first, a brief history of witchcraft, a strict video essay performed directly to camera in the voice of a 20s broadcaster.
T&T presents a brief history of witchcraft, number 1 of a series, The Archwitch's Day Off, produced by Clark Cooper and the Tent and Tinder Picture House. Way back, 1606, our race is born by the hand of the embellisher of calamity. By way of 7, Sinis Nix is born for the first time. In his passing, he returned them to us in the form of the Intrinsic Council. Later on, 1661, the Nomi Gramarciaca is built and witchhood begins to flourish. Out of nowhere, our Intrinsic Council is replaced by Belphegor himself. Those who served retain their strength, but their positions are passed to the next generation to better serve our kind. The ceremony now takes place every 50 years, though nobody quite knows what takes place. And who better to tell you about that than the 8th Intrinsic Palace herself, ex-Pallas Victoria?
Suffice to say, the Archwitch was less than pleased, and upon ejecting the tape, she crushed it with her bare, unenchanted hands. Immediately, albeit surprisingly, several impatient hands shot into the air with pesters and questions. Yes, she declared, as if it was a controversial secret when, in fact, many former intrinsic witches turned to teaching, and it was, in fact, a very noble profession. Those who have done, teach, she paraphrased. In terms of choosing a student to pick on, the Archwitch first selected anybody that hadn't said anything stupid for at least 2 weeks. Then, failing that, Victoria would choose whoever had the silliest haircut. Stanley Steele, with his family's trademark bowl cut, usually got first pick. "What's it like?" he asked. Embarrassing, really. It wasn't, he was. What is this, primetime television? Boy, she thought, she really wasn't cut out for this mentor lark. She shook her head and shrugged, as all good teachers do. It was strange, and awe-inspiring, and it left her mostly at a loss for words. Mostly, she repeats, because she couldn't remember half her service. If you are chosen and you have no say in the matter, you are overcome in mind, body, and spirit. You are imbued with direct access to the indigo reality's absolute current of magical energies, a vessel for your chosen major discipline. Think nothing but palace magic and the matters around it. Think nothing of your choice to specialize in the magic of warfare. Next, she selected the inconspicuously named Weirish male, buck teeth, alfalfa sprout hair. He, apparently, had somehow never heard of the Intrinsic Council, the divinely empowered, semi-centennially cycled government body dictating life and law of all witch kind. He asked for a list, which she drew out on the whiteboard with all the enthusiasm of a vet putting down their second dog of the day. She explained, I served as your 8th Pallas from 1961 all the way to 2011 with Kronos Marnie, who, write this down, is credited with the only second term in all of time. Then came the 9th Council. They and their major disciplines are as follows, she continued. Tartarus Solomon, the embodiment of our contract to Belphegor, in which we must eventually bring him permanently to our plane. Tartarus magic directly borrows the intense spiritual power of the remnants themselves, or conjures their physical presence. Métis Delphi, holding dominion over the material world. Métis magic allows us to manipulate basic universal fundamentals, a common tool amongst witches. Many choose to dabble in Métis magic alongside their major discipline. Thanatos Olive. Sat upon the fence post between life and death, Thanatos magic study primarily focuses on the practical application of necromancy in the progression of medical science. Pallas Maquette. A master of Pallas magic, makes use of fatal energies, as well as aid and abet combatants by spiritually rallying troops. Historically used for war waging, it was ex-Pallas Isabel to whom our school was dedicated. In her name, we strive to educate the next generation. Themis Alistair, the restricted discipline. Those who wish to practice Themis magic will find themselves beneath a mountain of paperwork before they're allowed to meddle in our reality's very pool of order or integrity to make alterations here and there. Percy's Latika. Same goes for this, restricted to those who truly wish to dedicate themselves to the study of Belphegor's ways. Percy's magic taps into the quasi-living force known as chaos or calamity to make outright changes to reality as a whole. Kronos Juliet. Forbidden by the Gramercy Sacrament. To study Kronos magic, one is chosen by the Council themselves, for none of you are trusted to flick through the folds of time. Nobody is, and doing it will incur the wrath of Salem. No further questions, please. We're already running behind. Adelaide produced the second tape and introduced her own project as an exploration of integrity and calamity, told through stilted narration and extended extreme wide shots of the school's castle grounds, the artificial sun hovering at midday point with the seclusion field in full display, and an unexplained close-up of her pupil. 3 out of 10, all in all.
The Tent and Tinder Picture House presents The Ties That Bind Us, or How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Grand Scheme of Things. Integrity and calamity, what are they? To put it simply, they are 2 of the many fundamental forces in our universe, designated the Indigo reality. In this brief summation, I intend on comparing and contrasting these 2 intrinsic concepts and their effect on the witching world as a whole. Firstly, integrity. The grand scheme of things, though perhaps not exactly the way things should be, the living force of integrity keeps basic universal constants constant, and through the use of Themis magic, we witches can manipulate the preordained parameters assigned to our plane. Now, calamity, known in some circles as chaos, its manifestations often foretell universal anarchy and changes to the grand scheme of things. Commonly, the witch's allfather, Belphegor, is known as the embellisher of calamity due to his...
Assuming this might go on for a while, Archwitch Victoria ejected the tape and pulled out its entrails so that nobody may suffer through it again. Question time. The students, as interested as ever, raised their hands at her like a nest of rattlesnakes. This time, Victoria went for the eldest in her classroom. At 17, Anita Beldo was on thin ice. She had only 1 more year to make it into 4th grade. Applicants over the age of 18 were referred to different practices. Not that they're no good or anything, it's just that Victoria believed in the system in place, despite its own personal bias against her. "How do we know all this?" she asked, clearly reaching her pinnacle. The Archwitch was certain she'd never asked a question before this, so it was imperative she gave it her all. "Books," said the Archwitch. How long have you been a witch, Anita? 5 minutes? I've definitely told you, you especially, the story of Sinis Nix. Before the Spectre burned out, it composed 3 tomes. The Codex Invocaverant, which sought to teach generations of witches to mold the world around them, the Iuris Scriptorio, which can unravel integrity, and the Transmutation Maleficium, the key to calamity. "This is all really dense," said one of the students. It was low-hanging fruit, and she ignored it. It wasn't supposed to be easily digestible. It was supposed to be stuffed just far into their thick little noggins that it might simply slop out onto the page come time to tick boxes and write essays. With that in mind, Archwitch Victoria pointed out the window. In unison, all heads turned, as though she commanded their very skeletons with puppet strings. She pointed, of course, to the western turret of the oldest part of the Nomi Grimassi archive, where a silver bell is kept under the supervision of, obviously, the Bell Watch. Another task of the Bell Watch? Keep those bloody books safe, and add a sticky little fingers like theirs. "The books are kept there," she told them. "It's why the archive exists in the first place. It wasn't until the 5th Council that the school grounds were constructed." It was the goal of each intrinsic council to make at least one monumental difference in their 50-year reign. For example, it was the 3rd who drafted the first magical military, following the incessant and ineffective witch trials of America, the "if all else fails" contingency. In the 4th, there was Tartarus Pietro, who first managed to successfully force a remnant from the filter plate into the body of a human, creating the first Cambion. Come the 7th, in the early 20th century, there was Thanatos Honey, who demanded a once-a-decade switch-up of the infinitely expanding grounds. A spring cleaning ceremony, where the archive is upgraded with modern amenities and the latest technologies, so as to not lose track of the mortal world around them. "It's coming up," she told them. The Archwitch had been petitioning for the inclusion of vending machines on campus since before you had to plug them into an outlet. Before outlets, probably. She couldn't quite remember at this point, as she, like all other witches, had an estimated lifespan of, something around 1200 years. "What about the 9th? Asked little Sana Viceroy, who'd been named as such because she was a child prodigy, and, as all child prodigies are, she was about the height of a child. 7 or 8, probably. She hadn't been given a student glossary, so she simply didn't know. Victoria had forgotten the question, and so it had to be repeated. "Oh," she began. "Well, last I heard, Kronos Juliet wanted to gently introduce the human population to our existence through time travel trial and error. We wanted to do it," she continued, "but we didn't have the budget. After all the nonsense that seemed to be happening in the world, what with the loss of the Eternal Plate in 2013, the discovery of the anti-human gene after that, and then the whole vampire problem in 2008, it felt like it might be time to just drop the bomb and tell the world." In an upset that would shock every member of the school's faculty, Apollo Driel had also prepared a short film. He was not what you'd call a classically intelligent student, often loafing around campus outside of class. He wasn't even a particularly dedicated filmmaker. He just might have been the only member of the student body who had any understanding of the post-production process. It was an animated feature, so were he not a witch, the manner in which Apollo's creation found its way onto a VHS tape might have come into question. He was, though, so nobody said anything stupid. He didn't bother to introduce it, nor hint towards its contents. After all, when she thought about it, the Archwitch had not given them a brief of any kind. So far, they'd done a fairly good job. Up until right now, this very moment, actually, as the television fuzz clears up to reveal our protagonist. Before the eyes of an entire class of fledgling witches, and a former member of the Intrinsic Council, whose history alone is hearkened by the last living angels of Indigo, stands a crudely drawn penis with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a pointy hat, named in handwritten subtitles. He was the first intrinsic phallus.
Once upon a time, there was an island of nothing. Then, all of a sudden, some very angry French people stole a boat, and then they found the island. Wild. Anyway, after that, they sacrificed some of themselves to summon a big scary fire demon. His name was Sinis Nix. He wrote 3 books. I have not been allowed to read any of them yet, and it is the only reason I'm here. Also, eventually, Sinis Nix exploded.
When he exploded, bits of him was left over. We call these bits the artifacts of Nyx. Apparently, ages ago, each artifact could do something rad, like grant wishes and bring back the dead, but somebody decided that that was too sick. I think it was Cronus Rani. They got sealed away forever, and then some idiot lost a bunch of them. Apparently, that's what killed Pallas Isabel, apparently. Safe. Thanks, bye.
A travesty of both art and knowledge, enough for the ex-Pallas to conjure a miniature Salem's fist to strike down from the ceiling into the television below. It exploded in fantastic fashion, as expected of her own technique. Apollo Driel would spend the next 6 years in detention with her, she surmised, as she selected the next hand waving to her. "Where are they now?" asked Algernon Fintopple from the back row, where she'd placed him in an effort to never speak his name out loud for fear of summoning some unknown hex upon herself, while his voice irritated her. His question infuriated, in a pincer attack on her mental stability. She found herself referring to her phallic counterpart as an official source. After all, he did literally say that some idiot, referring to the 7th Metis Lucci, had lost a bunch of them. "And we don't have them." "Well," she said, almost certain that she should bite her tongue. "I don't think so. At the very least," she told them, "they're not up there." And with a flick of her wrist, she carried their attention from one side of the room to the other, out the window, and towards that western turret on the oldest part of the Nomi Grimarsi archive, which exploded before her very eyes. "I did not do that," she told them. "I'm almost certain." An alarm started blaring, a loud, panic attack-inducing alarm that you wouldn't expect to hear in a building so made of stone, as though built into every wall were surround sound subwoofer speakers. In case of emergency, drop the bass. It was a sound that the Archwitch had become very familiar with over the past 200 years, because it meant there was trouble, the trouble had been identified, and the trouble was probably going to get away with it initially, but there'd be an investigation, and then a big fight at the end. That's how it goes with witches, generally. They love a good detective story, but most of their problems can be solved with a clap around the back of the head and a good telling off. Still, the students did not move until told to do so, ordered afoot by the outraged Archwitch, whose cattle shuffling meant she'd miss a good chunk of the action, if not all of it. For an explanation, she turned to Apollo, who was darting his eyes. A charm spell, he revealed, which he had applied upon his arrival to help entice a learning attitude. The Archwitch, suffice to say, was not the least bit impressed. Worse still, when Victoria did arrive on the scene in the Bell Watch turret, she found that the damage had already, in fact, been sorted by a first responder, the good Kronos Juliet, who informed her that the Codex Invocaverant would need recovering, and rather quickly, if you don't mind. By 2016, the creator of the Indigo reality, the All-Giver, Salem, or the initial entity, had all but turned a blind eye to their unexpectedly persistent pet project. But not because there was something else happening amongst the endless void in which it sat, hunched over, cross-legged, hands across its face. It was simply that, as of say, July 8th, 1979, our initial entity had been trying to reduce its watch time. Too much going on, better things to be doing. Like trashy TV, the Indigo reality would chug along left to its own devices, and so other forces vied for control. Life remained eventful for the denizens of the Indigo reality at all times. From the arid wastes to the grandest concrete jungles, integrity and calamity waged silent war. No, not a war. More like a patient round of chess, fought blindfolded by unassuming participants, so assured that they're up to something else entirely that they turn a blind eye to the whispering. None were safe from the wandering hands of the so-called gods, but none were favored more than Aoife Sheridan, who, on March 5th, felt obliged to answer the door to her own study.
You're listening to episode 12 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, an audiozine presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. The following broadcast is intended for mature audiences only. Despite having occupied the manor known as Strangelove for 190 years, the Stained Detective had never once been asked to open this door herself. Those who enter Aoife Sheridan's storefront of surreality may feel wonky and wrong. Rarely will the hall allow you to take the same door somewhere twice. A labyrinthian sprawl of unfinished rooms, identical furnishings, and exits to elsewhere. Strangelove was undoubtedly a magical artifact of the grandest nature. Archaic illusions and carbon-dated spackle amongst the irregular architecture inferred a divine designer, specifically Gwalgothrith, the patron saint of lunacy. Knock knock. Wait, knock knock? Disconcerting to say the least. You can't just walk up to Strangelove and let yourself in. You can't actually even approach it, a la Zeno's paradox. As with all magical endeavors, accessing Strangelove carried rules and risks, but to break it down, to enter, one must do so on purpose, through the use of a very specific magic circle. A rite, drawn upon the skin. With this, and provided you've not been barred by the master in advance, any solid wooden door will take you where you wish to be. The foyer, and only the foyer, appears before you. Here, she'll test your mettle. Up until around this time last month, Aoife Sheridan had an assistant, a loyal if not sarcastic lich named Major Tom simply for convenience. If her pet talking skeleton didn't spook you right away, then maybe you've seen something worth talking about. A case for the Stained Detective. If judged appropriate, the pale PA will unveil the entrance to Aoife's study and even open the door. Unfortunately, this bewitched prat had been looking up his civil rights and insisted on taking at least 28 days vacation in order to find himself. So Aoife was left to deduce the truth of this anxiety-inducing nightmare on her Todd. She couldn't, as it seemed, not from her armchair anyway. Before bothering to rise, Aoife closes her eyes and consults the slacker in her subconscious. No response. Unwillingly, she stands to her feet. She waits, hoping for an answer, but the knocking keeps coming. A lurch, and she's at her desk, top drawer, where she keeps her medication. A handful of scrunched scrap paper, torn from early 30s novels, which had outlived their rereadability, but worked quite well to soothe those most antisocial nerves. The audacious cretin knocking at her door, which, for posterity, had been carved from a piece of the sonnet and was blessed to be mostly soundproof, turned out to be a shrunken old hag, dressed head to toe in filthy grey rags, like caked in actual filth, as though she'd been buried twice today. Aoife didn't much like the witches, not at the moment, and she could smell one a mile away. She hadn't much liked the witches for, say, 8 years now. This one exuded signs of witchhood, like she'd dressed as one for Halloween. Not only was she covered in shit and wearing a stupid hat, but Aoife could see that she was ballpark 102 years older than her, and she was babbling in Old French. A scholar of the occult, and ageless herself, the Stained Detective knew well enough that people-shaped people haven't really been immortality candidates for that long. All the saints were dead, so if you were older than 200, and you could usually tell, because Ole only does so much, then you were either a descendant of the first witches, or you were a Cambion, like Aoife. That was her designated title of species, acknowledged only by the witches. Aoife considered herself undead as a synonym for immortal. Held within her static flesh and bone were two souls bound as one, her dull mortal self and her remnant, a being which apparently represented some lost godhood. Been there, done that. They called it the natural way of things, which, well, she believed on some level because it worked in her favor. That said, her relationship with the parasite Nibirius had suffered a fissure or two in recent history, but the baseline survived. Nibirius offered her power and knowledge, abilities untold, and Aoife offered a solid footing on the stationary plate for as long as she stood, abilities untold,
Quite the phrase to use considering the nature of her remnant's physical influence on her. For through Aoife's inquisitive nature, Nibirius manifested a desire to consume living knowledge. By imbibing the flesh or fluids of another living creature, the stained detective could review every event of the bequeather's entire lifespan. The duration of this ability was difficult for even Nibirius to quantify, but let's say a single drop of blood might cover one's birth through to month 14. Blindfolded, she could chow down on, say, 100 grams of man mince and solve a whodunit in a matter of minutes. It never came in order, see. Truth be told, she'd often burn through a pint or two just finding where she needed to be, and folks were rarely such keen patrons. Beneath the calloused skin of her index finger, the stained detective kept a scalpel blade for such occasions. Perhaps, with her remnant's help, she might get a hearty scan in and hear a name or something useful like that. By the time she'd even considered nicking the woman's already bandaged skin, Aoife found herself serving afternoon tea to her guest. "Sugar?" she asked, entirely without meaning to say anything quite so pleasant. "Listen, can you stand yourself up, please, witch? I could do with a hello. Identify yourself, maybe. Tell me a secret. Anything will do, you know?" Of course, the crone did no such thing. She didn't even lift her tight veil of robes and wraps which doubled, no, tripled her actual size. Swaddled in them like a particularly resilient mummy or a 1,000-year-old baby. God, it was old cloth. Frayed edges, moth-tuned corners. Older than Aoife, certainly. She sat herself down on the guest settee to perhaps enforce a little eye contact, though she had difficulty locating the appropriate smears of shadow. Seeking stillness in the void, she found swarming motion. There was no hint that she might recognize the sullen cow, but the assumption that she ought to know her name right off the bat sent a prick up her spine. No amount of tutting, finger-clicking, or leg fidgeting brought a relevant legend to mind. There was a slight murmuring in the back of her head, though she put that down to the sound of Nibirius's disappointment. The aforementioned souring of their intangible connection had been brought on initially by the slow degradation of Aoife Sheridan's 234-year-old brain. There was no physical damage, nothing of the sort. She couldn't sustain any lasting damage because her body was in stasis. A quick look-see at the GP would chart Aoife's health as pretty good for a 25-year-old because that's when she turned. But as it happens, if you dedicate your entire unending life to study, you're eventually gonna run out of space up there. Her mental health was shot, so she was always up and down. She found herself misplacing solemn artifacts and biro pens throughout these hallowed halls, and she was, for the most part, generally losing her marbles. In a few decades, she hypothesized, she'd be as mad as the old bat in her nice, lovely leather recliner. "Have we met?" she asked. "Are you looking for a detective? I'm currently on leave, really, specially for your kind. Or is this the world's slowest burglary?" To the detective's surprise, the old crone spoke. Quite the opposite. Slow words trickled out like smoke vapor, crawling across the carpet, and then up into Aoife's metaphorically and not so pointed ears. She didn't speak very much Old French, bar the archive's required reading, but apparently that didn't much matter. Instinct still begged her to leap over, grab the woman by the loose-fit bandages she'd wrapped herself in, and just find out what the hell was going on. She thought better of herself, and instead took what was being offered, a small rose gold ring. It was warm to the touch, certainly above body temperature. "Nice. Very pretty," grumbled the strange detective, looking it over once or twice. It radiated wearability. A perfect circle, like it had been machined only 15 minutes ago and delivered specifically for Aoife's personal use. She was, of course, forbidden from wearing it. Some kind of artifact, is it? Beneath her veil, the crone nodded. "It is now." The old bat took to her tea with terrific haste, as though she held the world record for most liquid absorbed by rags in 2.5 seconds, and was intent on keeping it. Irritating. It clearly came from Aoife's personal stash of vintage Narcissus, because she remembered pouring it for her, though she didn't remember pouring it for her. Without so much as a swallowing sound, another was requested, to which Aoife obliged by offering her own untouched mug. It was cold now, anyway. Between vicious sips, the old crone declared this ring to be a fragment of calamity itself, and with that, Another artifact of Nick's entered Aoife Sheridan's life. She nearly dropped it, having almost stopped believing the stories were true. The suspicious radiation which she felt canoodling her palm was, in fact, the spiritual residue of the embellisher himself. How tantalizing. She'd seen one before, of course, but that must have been hundreds of years ago. Way, way before she'd been tenured with the archive. 1826? Aoife had stood beside the famed Kronos Rani of the Fifth as she sealed the heart of Sinis Nix and hid it away for all time. Obviously, you can't take everything the witches say as hard fact. Aoife knew firsthand that the embellisher had a tendency to bend the truth here and there, but the artifacts themselves had some stellar power behind them. 5 in pride, 6 in greed, recited the crone. In truth, Sinis Nix had only gifted their crown, eye, maw, heart, and cestus, which was clearly not enough, because from what was left over, the witches crafted 6 traditional magic bands, all sealed away, she continued, until today. Answer the phone. Aoife's cell phone had not rung yet, but it would shortly thereafter, formally confirming the detective's suspicion. Clairvoyance was not a common trait in witches, bar the stories. It was a specific skill set, and a rare one at that. Kronos, the magic of classical mechanics. Rare to meet a witch of your caliber, she told the crone as she lifted the phone to her ear. Hello, who is it? Speak up, I haven't got all day. Her pointed tone was a familiar one to the voice at the other end, as, consistent in her quirks, the stained detective never checked her caller ID. She was old, mostly, and anxious. And there were certainly people she didn't want to be talking to whom she would certainly have to answer. And that fact blew bubbles up her ass. So she kept her index finger over the middle of the screen to maintain an element of surprise on herself. A similarly sharp set of sounds stab out from the speaker. Don't start, it warned. It, of course, being the bitch witch supreme, former Pallas Victoria. Archwitch now, apparently. Those who can't do, don't you dare, she repeated. She would, though, because it was then Pallas Victoria's deciding vote that cast Aoife off Nomis Gramercy Isle in the first place, back in 08, choosing to sack her from the school's board of artificers and essentially barring her from any and all magical investigation. Piece it together, and you can probably figure out that it's all been downhill from there, really. If only, she'd said, because real crime was all too mortal. What is it this time, Vicky? She asked. Hath the devil come down to Georgia? I'll tell you one thing, she bit back. The vampires certainly didn't return. Do you have a minute to talk about our Lord and Saviour, Sinis Nix? Aoife threatened to hang up, but also excused herself from the Time Witch for the time being. She deduced that much already, now secure in the knowledge that such confident command of forbidden magic could only mean she wouldn't go meddling and get lost in the sparsely furnished depths of Strangelove. In a display of excellent patience for a woman of her boundless age, the stained detective allowed this backstabbing, snake-faced, third nipple-having knobhead to explain herself before she tossed her phone out the window. She didn't have windows, though she wasn't confident she'd said that bit out loud. The former Pallas was already talking, but Aoife's brain had not yet stopped narrating. She was a few essential details into the conversation before she actually clocked back in, so she asked Naberius for a summary after the fact. In short, some miscreant had ransacked the archive, nicking the Codex Invocaverant right from under the Bellwatch's nose. Aoife Sheridan knew what all of those words meant and the implications henceforth. That is, the implications of this phone call. Not a single lick of contact in 8 years. Not a phone call, not an email, not a raven through the window. Not that she had windows, but oh, look, another magical book has gone missing, better call our very good friend Strangelove. Well, the archive certainly wasn't going to get another drop of Aoife's sweat, that was for sure. With a huff and a tut, she finally hung up the phone, returning herself to the Time Witch. Going with due haste and a single question, witching open the door to her study and stomping all the way along. Are you with them? She barked, holding her hands up in an offensive manner. She'd not learned much of any palace magic herself during the years under the sweet, sweet protection of tenure, though that was mostly because she'd spent all the years swatting away pepper fairies and solving murders. She did, however, opt to take a class or two in Tartarus magic. See, In order for a witch to cast their magic, it first needed to be distilled through something, often anything. In extreme circumstances, Aoife had seen witches appropriate blood or salt, olive oil, even barbecue sauce once. Primarily, they utilize a pestled mineral known as ashbearer ink, likely derived from another part of Sinisnix. It was rare, good day rare. A witch only earned so much ashbearer ink over their lifetime because their lifespan was so damn long. As such, witches are asked to make a choice now and again to permanently add a spell to their arsenal. A magic circle tattoo, quick-fire conjuring at the snap of your fingers. Aoife was covered in them because she specifically sought ashbearer ink as payment for her often less than legal methodology. It was a tough sell for all 29 years of her service, but she could have done anything around Thanatos' mercy of the 8th. Here, Aoife had run into a problem. With her current loadout, she could tie herself to anything with an Ocnus rope. She could call upon the very remnants lurking in the filter, though she'd failed to keep in contact recently, and she could even bring small, inanimate objects to life for at least 45 seconds. But she couldn't, say, set the Time Witch on fire or conjure 1,000 spectral missiles to smite her foe. So the pose was unnecessary to say the least. A vogue rendered further lame by the undressing crone. She'd derobed herself, whilst unobserved, and beneath like 700 shabby shawls, she stood a meager 5'1". Seemingly dragged from some ancient sarcophagus, she was indeed covered head to toe in bandages. Fabric grew increasingly yellow as you made it closer to her chest, where it crisscrossed over her crooked body, in which to say that the bindings around her arthritic shivering fingers had most recently been rewrapped. It was, suffice to say, impossible to identify any definitive ashbearer stickenboke. Cambian eyesight was historically fantastic, and even from 3 meters away, Aoife could count 16 layers of gauze. More? Here and there, she had tufts of hair sticking out, which ran the length of her body like translucent trickling, so that helped shape where the crone was beneath all of that. But tricky thing was, she had this whole letterbox thing going on where her eyes should have been. No amount of focusing or distance closing could define them. It was as though there was simply nothing beneath the bandages besides the visage of a woman bent into the shape of a lightning bolt. "You've not said anything, Time Witch," she said, nodding towards her still outstretched hands. "I'm warning you, these puppies can go off like the Fat Man, and I'm really not as patient as the stories say I am." And then, of course, she was sat back on her guest settee, where no fist fight would occur. Nothing says "I'm well aware" more than literally skipping over the conversation entirely, and she knew it, because Aoife could remember the old crone, at one point in the last 15 minutes, had said that she had heard what had happened with the vampires, and it was not the move she would have made in that particular situation. Rude, if anything, because she was probably pushing out more vital information, like the identity of the patron saint of celebrity, or the recipe for her famous slow cooker chili. The Time Witch was still stood up at this particular junction, and she creaked with each waft of the draft. "It was no coincidence that I came to you, Aoife Sheridan." The crone paused for a moment, as though something in the far reaches of her gaze caught her fancy, but she didn't point it out. 190 years ago, you recovered the transmutation maleficium from the clutches of Thanatos Uaku of the Third. It was here, in this very room, that you struck her down through a medium that you should not have been able to comprehend, let alone understand. And yet, you earned the right to call the Hall of Hans the Slender your domain. You bore witness as Kronos Rani of the Fifth sealed the heart of Sinisnix and all his mementos alike, and in return, she allotted you 2 days of reading time, did she not? Aoife nodded, not that the Time Witch waited for a response. "I am neither friend nor foe to the witches, though I share their blood. Think of me as an interested third party, Aoife Sheridan. Think of me as a fan of Strangelove's track record." Resistance was futile. Aoife would later sum it up as something like a primal twitch, the opposite of fight or flight, or noticing that all the dust in the room never seems to find the right place to settle down. No matter what Aoife said, eventually she'd have to say the right thing, though she might make her way across several different languages if she has her way. "I give up, stop doing that," she said. Then her phone vibrated. If a robbery brought the Time Witch out of her grave, then maybe it was worth a look-see. Rebalance the scales of calamity and integrity, and I will offer you a similar privilege. Cut the crap, stop with the buzzwords, Aoife told her. I don't want to read your stupid book. I'm running out of space as it is, and I'm sure you're aware, but I couldn't actually read that big white book you keep talking about, so what good is this to me? There was another chorus of creaking as the old crone looked Aoife up and down and back up again several times. Probably hard to tell with no eye contact. I could solve that problem right now if I wanted to. Suspicion increased. Aoife hated a braggart. She'd already pestered Niberius as to the probability of actual, real-life mummies, but as always, the answer was, it's all real, one way or another, which was of little help literally and metaphorically. For your information, the illegibility of the transmutation maleficium has little to do with you, Aoife Sheridan. One must first decipher the Codex Invocaverant before seeking out further strength. The embellisher of calamity knows full well the limitations of the flesh. Perhaps, if you jog your memory, you may come to some conclusions. Check your phone. God, the old crone made it sound so preordained. The stained detective knew that fate was rarely so unwilling to change course, unless somebody else was in the driver's seat. On her phone, Aoife had received a picture message from the former Palace Victoria, which appeared to be some kind of torn paper note. A calling card from the scene of the crime, pulled right out of a child's ring-bound journal. Cheap pink paper, dotted with love hearts, and on it, in biro, the culprit had drawn a rabbit with a smiling face, rosy cheeks, and a sweet little witch hat. In cursive, the note read, BRB, X. Niberius offered no further guidance, so Aoife agreed to take on the case. A little expansion of the old memory might do the trick. Unfortunately, there was bugger all she could do with just a picture. Say, she began, and you're gonna have to bear with me on this, okay? Because I'm not totally sure on the limitations of this oh-so-indigo reality, and I know nothing about the wildly forbidden magic you're tossing about with here. But if I may hypothesize, could you do us both a favor and just reach into space-time and yoink this drawing out of the pocket of Palace Victoria? She asked. Of the 8th, that is. I don't know who's doing it now, come to think. Check your pockets, said the crone. We'd better get a move on. She's already quite mad. In quarantine from witchy antics, Aoife Sheridan had been dabbling in the much more exciting mortal world of venture capitalism. Most recently, with no big bad skeleton to tell her no, she'd acquired an entire franchise of 80s-themed coffee shops. She had this whole team of accountants see, and government dogs will pay top dollar even to those who don't really want it. It was a reasonable investment because she'd been going to each one across the country, introducing herself as the new CEO and linking the back office door to Strangelove. The Flat White Duke Coffee Company would become an access network throughout the United Kingdom, and further, as opposed to the loose assortment of doors to Scandinavia her home originally held. With that said, Aoife and the Time Witch made their way to a franchise in Hull, of all places, where the last nice witch occupied a houseboat. Rani had lived a rather long, rather eventful life, and, quite frankly, enough was enough. In her own self-inflicted exile, Rani now pacifistically floated within the confines of her residential mooring with her wife and familiars. Aoife Sheridan was quite happy to disturb this relative peace as long as it meant getting home and going back to sleep. Not that Aoife needed sleep. It mostly just passed days for her. Don't need magic for that kind of time travel. Speaking of, as the two arrived on the marina, the Time Witch was asked to remain shoreside. Rani didn't open the door. Her wife did. As luck would have it, Lucci Melba had lost an arm in the initial recovery of the transmutation maleficium and still blamed Aoife for it. A grudge lasting, nearly 200 years? Rude, to say the least. But no words were exchanged in polite company. A request from Rani that had also held its weight for 2 centuries. I've not even seen a witch for nearly 8 years, Aoife began. But I'm pretty sure today I've spoken to, say, 4 former members of the Intrinsic Council? Lucci nodded and closed the door. I'd say so, she said. For sure, She's wearing a dampener charm, couldn't even smell what kind of magic she used. Kronos, like the missus, Aoife explained, pointing her attention towards the missus, who was reclined on a built-in sofa. It was a cozy old boat, wood-burning stove and all. On the table front and center between plastic cushioned couches were several mid-session decks of cards. It appeared that, in every conceivable timeline, Rani was getting her ass kicked. Aoife continued with her brief explanation. Not that the fifth-in-line fixed point in time hadn't already witnessed the hot scoop herself. "You've got something for me, friend?" asked Rani, refusing to sit herself up like the forever kitten she'd adopted as a familiar. Relaxed, stress-free. The Kronos of the Fifth was as powerful as ever, and as she took the piece of paper from Aoife, she cast a spell under her breath. Bare-armed magic. No circle, nothing. That was the power of an intrinsic witch. Free-form access to the embellisher's calamity-driven stream of energy. Erica Malleus, she said finally. She stole the codex. She shouldn't be too difficult to find. I'll even write her address down for you, save you the Googling, friend. Erica Malleus, repeated Lucci. Little rascal. They should have locked her away when she was born. Who? Insisted Aoife. Clearly, this Erica Malleus had a formidable reputation, but as far as Aoife could remember, she'd not come across that name before. If possible, Niberius would have shaken their head. But they had neither a neck nor anything you could specifically call a head. Some punk student, she assumed, who'd been causing trouble with their innate gift. Far from it, though. Erica Malleus was not allowed to study at the school because she wasn't a witch. Lucci piped up. It's not because she's not a witch. It's because she's unnatural. Rani rose, causing 2 of the decks to slide across the table, essentially nullifying all 5 results. You shouldn't speak such guff, dear, she said. Erica Malleus is a lost lamb, undeserving of her current situation. The council turned a blind eye to her birth, and now that her guardians have passed, that lost lamb's developed a bit of a rebellious streak. Witches. Always stalking around the point. Answer, demanded Aoife. Please answer the question. I don't want to be here all day. Clearly, you're in the middle of something plain and simple. Number 1 answer on the board. Erica Malleus is a... homunculus was the answer, and it came as quite a surprise. Aoife had been keeping an eye on the science since 1998, and nobody had even come close. Rarely did the Intrinsic Council simply sweep something under the rug like this. More often than not, cruelty overcame kindness. Calamity was aptly named indeed. Her parents, seemingly known criminals, birthed her in a Percy's magic ritual, and simply hid her amongst Sydney's northern beaches. Of course, you can't hide much from those who know all. So by all means, it was quite clear that the council chose not to acknowledge her existence until only 2 years ago, when her parents passed performing another similar ritual. Incredible magical aptitude from birth. Supposedly daffodils sprouted wherever she stepped. Aoife posed another question, one she knew to be stupid in nature, though that was very on-brand. You can't just, say, reach into space-time and pull, Rani objected. You know that's not allowed, friend. With her thumb, Aoife pointed behind her towards the exit-bound staircase and, more generally, to the witch outside. She bloody did it. Well, Rani paused. Well then, I presume the time police will be along any minute, Aoife. I expect you'll be leaving for Sydney ASAP. You could open up a portal to Heathrow at least. There was, for posterity, no evidence of any time police in the employ of Salem or any such entity in all of, well, time. It was an urban legend, like an old wives' tale, to stop stupid children from wandering into the woods. Only in this scenario, the stupid children could, with some practice, turn back time and erase the very concept of woods. With all that said, Aoife decided that it was time to make her move. She thanked her friend, she thanked her foe, and headed up the staircase towards the exit-bound door when, out of nowhere, she could taste nothing but sand. Wet sand, too. She fell out of the door, rather than stepped gracefully, as she'd like to imagine she did. It took a second for Aoife to gather her bearings, but as it appeared, either Rani or the Time Witch had enchanted the boat's way out in a similar manner to that of Strangelove. Now, she lay on a surprisingly cold and incredibly wet beach, most likely located, from the taste of it and also context clues, in the land down under. It was sometime in the nighttime when they arrived, because that's how the world worked. A wave washed over her, carrying the silver sheen of spread moonlight. Soaked her. Absolute nightmare. She certainly didn't know any hex of dryness or anything like that, and the old crone didn't feel like helping much. She was too busy, enjoying the view out across the ocean, or the Tasman Sea. It was one of the two. She wasn't quite sure. It was beautiful, shimmering, but not so much distracting. Then again, all of them, and this is not a presumption or a racist remark, but every single goddamn witch loves a good full moon. Waves lapped again, with no consideration for splash radius, and Aoife was beginning to take on more water than she comically deserved. On approaching the Time Witch, Aoife noticed that she was stood on the water's surface, amongst the reflections, and, without permission, she appeared to be doing the very same. See, Thomas and Elizabeth Malleus obviously lived in their own exile too. Otherwise, where would they have conducted their spooky experiments? And as lairs tend to be, it sat in the ocean somewhere uncharted, presumed to be unassuming. Oceans, being large, made for fantastic getaways, especially when you could materialize an island with relative ease. It was a brisk half-hour straight-out walk from the absolute center of Avalon Beach to what honestly appeared to be an enormous lightning rod stuck smack dab in the middle of nowhere waters. Evidently rust-proof sheet metal squares created a still cylinder, likely embedded in the Earth's bedrock crust. A trio of ringed prongs decorated the top, and about a third down from there, a single circular porthole. It was ballpark 312 feet in length, and tapered off at the bottom as though ending in a needlepoint. Bare otherwise on all sides, the old crone had to summon a ladder for them to reach the only possible entrance. Boy, did that feel risky. Top of the ladder, with shuddering winds tugging at her smoking jacket, and both hands pressed firm against the weathered alloy for balance. Too high. The stained detective knew that it was a magic ladder, so she wasn't going anywhere, and even if she did, she knew a fall from here couldn't kill her off. But that certainly didn't mean that Aoife Sheridan wasn't shitting herself. The Time Witch hadn't followed any further than the righteous waves. She'd stand guard at the ladder in case somebody else came paddling by. So there was Aoife, alone at the teetering top of the ladder, unsure of how to proceed. It was at this point, swaying 208 feet in the air, that she realized she was no longer so much investigating anything, but being led from place to place by somebody who knew what was going to happen at each location. Frankly, it was feeling more and more like a fool me twice situation. Glancing down, the old crone was waving up like a day tripper at a fun fair. Somehow, she even had a hot cup of tea. Even from this height, Aoife could tell she was probably smiling. She knew, obviously, that Aoife was now wondering why she'd even been brought into this mess. For one, why was it so easy to pocket that ring? So easy, she'd not even thought about it, actually. Had the dust not settled there either? Third party. Enough about her for now. This Erica Malleus character was sure to be fascinating. Aoife only hoped that she'd get the drop on her and have, at the very least, an interesting conversation. The mechanism in front of her seemed simple enough, because it had to be. There were literally no other options. No hinge, no bolts anywhere, extruding only an inch or two out from the wind-slapped metal surface. This porthole wasn't exactly a window into Erica's den, and it was dusty as all hell on the outside. It needed a wipe down. She didn't even want to put her face on it, and Aoife Sheridan was a crust punk queen in some circles. Cycling through options, hawking a loogie would probably get a fair bit of grease off. Nibirius couldn't confirm any biological differences in a Cambian saliva, despite the lack of its necessity, but Aoife was certain that she could taste copper at all times. She spat, though it disappeared. She spat again, and it disappeared. So she spat Then it was a mouthful of shag carpet and the warmth of an old coal fireplace. An angular, misshapen adult man pointed a lone finger at the detective from atop a pale kitchen table. Must have clambered up in some haste, as he'd spilled an entire carton of semi-skimmed, which lay soaking into the fabric about 2 meters ballpark from Aoife's recently bonked head. Legs shoulder width apart and bent at the knees, he may as well have had an exclamation point above his head. His head? One look at the man and, "Where the hell am I?" she said by accident. What a bloody day. First Hull, then New South Wales, and now, well, it appeared to be some kind of bungalow in the boonies. Wood cabin interior, open plan, candle lit, lavender scented, decorated with dotted oddities like trinket skulls, ornate vases, art and jewelry. You know, the telltale signs of a cat burglar. "Well," said the muffled detective, "an answer would be nice. I've been falling through doors all day and I'm starting to feel travel sick." Aoife rose to her feet slowly to avoid any unnecessary confrontation, and rose to the occasion by considering the shapeshifter an ally. It was difficult to maintain eye contact, but that was due to the multitude of distracting factors, and not only because the gentleman wasn't quite right. He was ballpark 7 foot and 5 inches tall. He had a milk mustache as well. Also, his eyes were too high up, and his chin appeared to still be bubbling. At his feet, splintered wood, wilting shoots, and a dusty old tome, the book she was looking for. His feet remained rooted, firmly, still, unlike his vibrating upper half, almost purposely proving Aoife's theory. Erica Malleus. It was all in the name, honestly. "What are you doing in my house?" he yelled in the voice of a little girl, before quickly covering his own mouth. "It's alright, kiddo," said Aoife. "I'm a bit of a thief myself. Sometimes, though, things need to go back. I'm willing to make a trade, if you're interested." With flourish, Aoife revealed her impending prize. "An artifact of Nick's," she said. "Don't know what it does. Do you want it? I mean, you've already read the book, right? Or I guess I don't mind waiting here until you're done with it." The Switch Witch mulled it over from above, but soon decided his poised position was unfit for hard thought. On more solid footing, his eyes seemed to be bobbing about the skin of his face in a manner most unnatural. He takes the book in hand and approaches in vain. They're lavender sprouts, not daffodils, beneath Erica's feet. It was, by all means, the least subtle surprise attack Aoife had ever come under. Telling. Like amateur hour slapstick, he swung only one of his lopsided arms with each stride forwards, holding the other outstretched to grasp the ring, a motion that Aoife would return in kind, having already pocketed the crone's prize. With intent to, at least sample, the shapeshifter's wacky ride of a lifespan, Aoife grasped the offending limb with all her strength and... an explosion. Aoife was sent flying backwards into the wall, then doubly smacked by the ensuing shockwave. Not enough to knock her dead, but judging by the visage of bone and red matter in lieu of a right arm, Aoife estimated she'd be down for about 15 minutes. It's like she'd lined her skin with claymores. A colossal release of magical energy had ripped her and the shapeshifter apart by force. How unstable. Incredible that the council would simply turn away from somebody so built to run amok. Erica Malleus looked the part now. Encompassed by swarming lights of October orange and ube violet, stood 4'8" off the ground, atop overgrown but dying shrubbery. Out of nowhere she'd donned a striped poncho and a big stupid hat, atop plush, blooming Pomeranian hair. 2-pence piece copper wisped out at split ends, fading to scrap paper grey. Sparks whip crack around her, radiating such intimidating strength that her perspiration turns to steam. Witches tend to remain pretty spry looking for the first few hundred years, but this little girl must have been, ballpark, 14, 16 actual years old, and her skin was littered with imperfect magic circles done in permanent marker. Sure, Aoife was a little in shock, but they were totally illegible and certainly made up. They wouldn't work, normally, but the young witch took stance to launch a front-on attack. In a contest of all-out strength, Aoife would surely fall short. No magic in her repertoire could match up to the heights of power-given form, and there was nothing suitable on hand to summon, say, Salios or Agaris onto her plane. A swift retreat, then regroup with the Time Witch. Surely this was also supposed to happen, right? slip up the wall backwards and wriggle through the porthole. Oof, that'd be a trip. At what height does water become concrete? 200 feet? 250? How about face first? In that case, best to make sure the crone's ring is safe. Her remaining flesh hand snakes into her pocket, and it simply slips on. One day, Aoife Sheridan would leave her home without sustaining some sort of mortal wound, or, at the very least, limit herself to one a day. The crone's band burned with all the fire of Sinus Nix himself, searing his image into her mind. She seemed to fall into the pain. It sears into her skin, then deeper still when the flesh gives way to bone. Briefly, her mind feels so full that it might actually split at the seams and expand endlessly across the planet, like an intellectual smoke scourge or a supervolcanic eruption of molten grey matter, mass extinction by a simple wealth of knowledge. It was every single thing that Aoife Sheridan had ever heard, read, thought, seen, or spoken in all 231 years, 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days of her life that she'd lived. Not a single tidbit was lost to the annals of her ancient mind. She could recall even the lone utterings of Nibirius, and their musings on the structure of reality itself. It only hurt for a few moments, though it passed like backyard surgery. It would be sore for a while, but not as sore as the exposed and still reforming bone claw on her other arm. It was permanently welded to her now, the ring. No sense in hiding that from the old crone. Erica was long gone. While Aoife was out cold, she'd made her getaway by blowing a hole in the faux wood wall of the needlepoint den. She could only hope that Victoria did show up now. Fortunately, she'd kept her phone switched on and today's location services were impeccable. She'd be found in a flash, she figured. But it wasn't like Aoife was fading away or anything. In fact, she felt better than ever. Fresh in head and body, as though cobwebs throughout had been thoroughly dusted and all cogs and whirs had been greased to factory quality. It was as though her soul had been plucked from the old, tired and stupid cadaver of Aoife Sheridan and slapped into a supercomputer designed for her own specificities. That, and Aoife felt very much more in contact with Nibirius, whom she could see so clearly looming in the back of her head. Now, the spectral devil had nothing to complain about, besides an impending request to explain what the hell just happened. It would take a moment to get used to, she figured, what with the dizziness she felt standing to her feet. All in all, she wasn't in too bad a shape. Her skeleton had finally finished regenerating, though it would take exactly 27 more minutes to heal completely, 21 for the muscular and vascular systems, and 6 for the skin and hair to come back. Fortunately, her Ashbearer ink would also reform. Magic, innit? Where now? Aoife had expected the old crone to at least try to climb up and see if she was still breathing, but as she peeped her head out of the porthole, it was Archwitch Victoria's mug that Aoife met with a scowl. She was floating, so why couldn't the Time Witch? Oh, because she was gone, probably followed on foot. She was nimble, evidently age still meant nothing to her. Aoife wriggled herself further out of the needlepoint den, the porthole portal cutting her off just above the waist. Ample room to examine the Archwitch. Naturally negating the currents of the sky, she stood totally still. Not even a cloak followed the breeze. Her military getup starched stiff beneath her big, stupid hat. The former soldier of fortune wore a grimace. The Archwitch had no time for words, and jetted off to her next destination. Preparation, as Aoife recalled, is rightly 2/3 of any venture, and so she'd already done the busy work of tying herself to Victoria with an Ocnus rope, which she'd summoned with a few reams of slack. Soon, it pulled her out of Erica's illusory cottage and into the vast open airspace by the unadulterated strength of the Killer Queen of Salem's spite herself. Not that Victoria didn't notice. In fact, she yelled something fairly obscene and threatened to drown Aoife where she hung. It was only the sudden sight of something enormous that caused her to delay the culpable homicide of the stained detective. At first, the distance between them made it appear to be a smokestack straight out piercing heaven, or a streak of daylight outpacing its rival. Then, as if clearing the exhale, one of 4 thick smouldering arms swept off the smog. Amidst it stood Erica Malleus in a form unimaginable, having just met her. thick stone skin, stricken with cracks and fissures, hardly containing the screaming inferno inside, cylindrical head, Goliath human lips. It could only have been an aspect of Sinisnix himself. Erica had been overwhelmed by the codex. Its imperceptible texts and psychic subliminal messaging found a welcome home in her excusably malleable molecules, and the swathing robes of corruptible energies that made her her made him sweat with anticipation. And as always, that's when it all clicked into place. At least, some motivations made a little more sense. The old crone, she was still standing on the water's crest. Her bandages were beginning to unravel, but she showed no sign of fatigue. Had they been in combat this whole time? A certain scent of desperation sort of clung to the air, as though Erica felt she'd been forced into a corner. Perhaps, if Aoife had not blown her own hand off then severely burnt the other one, she might have felt a tad more relaxed about the whole thing. The Time Witch did what she did best, twisting the fabric of reality in such a way as to temporarily revert the effects of rapid global warming, turning back the clock far further back than any present being may have witnessed. Calling from the depths below, ancient volcanic sediment, a geokinetic island, a viewing platform for Aoife and her steed. The two landed with immediate haste. Hovering the both of them had knocked the wind out of Victoria, but it was clear that her input would have been unnecessary regardless. She looked quite shocked when she muttered, "That's a blatant violation of the Gramercy Sacrament," which, in fairness, it was, but it was to be assumed that this particular witch might have been above such guidelines, as it were. They watched on agape, as all her gauze fell unwrapped, as the landmass shuddered still. In full stride against an aspect of Nyx, the silver-haired short-ass spared zero theatrics. With a snap of her fingers, her scorch-scarred skin was encircled by wisps of indigo that sparked and cracked around her, like she'd been staked to a November 5th bonfire. You'd hardly think she could walk amongst the living, let alone stand so strong in the face of certain defeat, with such vast amounts of previously sustained damage. Burns so deep they'd tempered her physical form, causing several thick patches of carbonized flesh to develop in areas where her skin was thinner, around the eyes, across the lips, up the back of her hands and between her fingers, deep as coal, harder than diamond. She too bore the visage of the embellisher's form, Chronos Liberté, of the first, Calamity's second wind, and the founder of Witchcraft, had returned to correct the mislaid course of a seemingly distracted intrinsic council by force, if necessary. As all the stories had told, even those from the tongue of Nibirius, the preordained goal of which kind was, of course, to craft a vessel for Belphegor's rise, and, well, there had been 9 sets of intrinsic witches and very little progress. This form, however, she deemed unacceptable. Erica wasn't willing or able to stomach the might of Sinisnix, and had thus been blinded to her own actions. Fists flew like fighter jets towards Liberté, but refused to connect, each one vanquished by a movement unseen. The aspect roared, sending a catastrophic seismic wave out towards the 4 corners of the map, a frequency that burst both of Aoife's eardrums and tore the Archwitch's stupid hat right off. Through persistent ringing, the stained detective watched on as the aspect advanced, dragging itself through miles of ocean trenches. Teetering off balance, it bore teeth, a historical first. Not even the first witches documented seeing a tongue. Liberté made no sudden movements besides turning to face Aoife and waving. When the aspect finally collided wastwards with the Time Witch's landmass, she turned her back to her foe and wiped the slate clean. To put it briefly, it had all been done without having to be done in the first place. Erica lay flat out atop the rock face, dozing with no visible injuries. She'd simply been restored to a previous version of herself, plucked out of a recent time frame, likely sometime before she'd had the chance to read the book. Another clear violation of the Gramercy Sacrament. Chronos Liberté of the First turns to dust before her eyes, erased from her position as a fixed point in time. "Time police," declared Aoife, though mostly to test if her ears had healed up yet. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," said Victoria, though certainly unironically. She couldn't be blamed. It did very much appear that Kronos Rani's much-rumoured time police did exist, and she'd been holding on to that tale since she served in the Fifth Council. Of course, it was just as likely that the original witch had finally exhausted her own personal supply of magic. In the end, all formerly intrinsic witches are also formerly immortal. As if to prove a point against ever using the phrase time police again, Aoife collected one of Liberté's bandages and wrapped it around the wrist of her ring-bearing arm. A memento which, if thoroughly inspected, might turn out to be worth boiling like a witchy stock. It'd be interesting to find out how much she really knew, said Victoria, from afar. Best to make a move on Erica, actually. Victoria clearly hadn't yet clocked that the codex would be somewhere on her person. Being careful not to touch the highly volatile Claymore child, Aoife retrieved the tome with her most recently acquired hand. It seemed to be damp and smelled slightly of milk. It also appeared to emit a vapour of some manner, though Naberius seemed certain that the embellisher, Belphegor, could not take refuge in an occupied host. Before Aoife could even open it, Victoria's hand graced her shoulder. Fully prepared to judo throw the bitch witch supreme straight into the South Pacific, Aoife's muscles tightened up. What's your next move, Vicky? Where do you go from here? No movement in her shaggy blonde hair, no billow in her cloak. The Archwitch was many things, but quick to pass true judgment she was not, in her military fatigues and combat boots, even decades after her service. Victoria had a reputation that even the last living angels would herald. Here, on an island warring with time, having witnessed the prime monarch of witchcraft do battle with the progenitor of magic itself, without spilling a drop of either's blood, Archwitch Victoria knew exactly what her next move was going to be. Though, to be fair, she'd known from the moment she'd left the archive. It was clear now to both parties that Kronos Liberté had assisted Erica Malleus in the robbery of the Codex Invocaverant. Certain aspects, however, remained unavailable to the stained detective. The initial explosion had been caused by Erica's poor control over her own magic. That was her arrival. Her departure came much swifter, and with an unprecedented cleanup. When Victoria arrived on the scene, Kronos Juliet of the Ninth informed quite promptly that she hadn't reverted the damage. Somebody else had. Stunk of Kronos magic, though. You can only hide so much from the personification of it. Liberté appeared again to pick Victoria's pocket, during which she'd spoken to her in Old French. Very little context, but the Archwitch was told flat out who the culprit would be and exactly what the Ninth Council was hiding. Erica Malleus, an embodiment of Percy's magic. A being of pure calamity. It was exactly what the Council should have been looking for, but instead, they'd shirked their responsibilities and left her for dead. According to Liberté, Erica could wake the artifacts of Nyx by simply being near them, something about frequency and resonation. To be honest, a lot of this was coming secondhand from somebody that only really knew what was going on because she'd once been inhabited by a divinely unending source of magic, and not because she'd researched the phenomenon. Witches are, by all means, creatures of tall tales. All in all, she needed the Codex because she needed to read the Transmutation Maleficium, because she wanted to find all of them, and she wanted to do it efficiently. The band of wits, which now resided on the finger of a Cambion, was the purest evidence of this. Cat burglar, Erica couldn't help herself. She'd found one all by herself. She didn't even need help to get into the archive. Liberté simply felt it happening, and reacted as one might by pinching back the ring, but, letting the little scamp leave with the book. Attention-seeking allowed. With a witch willing to cast away her own right to exist, there was never any risk that Erica might run wild. A controlled experiment, the results of which would come upon their return. Victoria lifted the child up with a flick of the wrist, and she floated in place. Now, the Codex has been recovered. The kid's gonna come with me, said the Archwitch, finally acting like a teacher. Proper training. That'll sort her out. Can't be left to fend for herself, not like this. Bet she's gonna be a nightmare when she wakes up. I'll never hear the end of it. Aoife confirmed. Well, that's probably what the old crone was trying to say. Well, that and, hey, homunculus equal good. Sure, said the Archwitch, summoning a portal before their eyes. Various shades of indigo squirmed free from thin air, crackle spark, then twist. In the eye of this storm fizzled a window, leading to the grand gates leading to the Our Lady of Palace School of Witchcraft. Come along, Aoife. I can permit you the 2 allotted days reading time you were offered. I will see the Cronus' will through to the end. I cannot, however, permit you to read it anywhere other than deep within the Archives library. If you wish to return yourself to studies of magic, you will do so on my terms. And begrudgingly, the Caribbean stepped in through the portal to where the witches live, casting one last glance at the fullest moon she'd ever seen.
You have been listening to Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull. The complete second series, originally published in 2020, written and directed by Jake Lucy. This production is copyright 2026 by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency and is intended for enjoyment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If you like this show, you might like chucking me a buck on patreon.com/sbda, or buying a digital zine at sbda.itch.io. Please visit us on the web at carefulthere'sbones.com for more surreal stories. Have a good night.